Story 1. I'm not going to give you my real name or location, as this is still somewhat ongoing and I need to remain anonymous, but do need some advice on escaping my predicament. What led to my life being ruined started as a stupid gift. My girlfriend, I'll refer to her as Audrey, texted me. She wanted to see me. She said she had something that would cheer me up. You see, earlier at school I told her about the big fight my dad had started with me. He was always nagging at me about responsibilities and manliness. He didn't get it. I was going to be a YouTuber when I graduated. He knew this, yet he kept pushing. I had no interest in working my life away for pennies like he had. But what really hurt is my mum took his side. She always had my back, but she betrayed me. She told me my dad was right, that I should have something to fall back on. It was like she expected me to fail. Audrey knew I was upset, and being the sweetheart she was, she wanted to help cheer me up. Just talking to her improved my mood. She was my rock. We met at our usual place, the abandoned boathouse a mile from where I lived. The place was creepy and dirty but private. I would often go there during school, skipping a few classes to write in my journal or scroll Reddit. I got there and saw Audrey waiting for me. As usual, she was dressed in all black. Some girls had a goth phase in high school, but Audrey lived it full time. She didn't care what people thought about her, and I loved her for that. "All right, babe, you have to close your eyes." I thought about arguing, but didn't. She was too excited. I closed my eyes. "Okay, hold out your hand." I did as she asked, and felt something hairy and warm brush my fingers. My eyes snapped open. I almost dropped the object. It was revolting. Audrey had placed a stuffed monkey in my hand, and not like a toy, but a grotesque, malformed little taxidermied animal. "What the hell, Audrey? What is that?" She laughed and closed my fingers around it. She got right up in my face. I was painfully aware of the gross little thing crushed between us. She whispered in my ear, "It's a lucky charm. Take it home and place a bowl of milk and some bread by it. At least that's what the old Romanian lady I bought it from said." I gave her a disapproving look. "You really shouldn't be talking to people like that. They're untrustworthy." Audrey scoffed, ignoring my advice. We playfully argued for a bit, then sat watching the water until the sun started to get low. We said our goodbyes and went our separate ways. When I got home, my dad was waiting. "Where have you been? We tried calling you." I didn't feel like talking, so I kept walking. He yelled after me, "Hey, I asked you a question, Josh. You've been missing for hours." I just didn't have the energy to deal with his bullshit. I slammed my bedroom door shut and jumped into my bed. Audrey texted me, "Don't forget to feed Junior." If she really wanted to cheer me up, titty pics would have been a better solution. But despite my constant encouragement, she was too self-conscious for things like that. Knowing she would ask about it in the morning, I crept downstairs and grabbed some bread and a jug of milk. I poured some in an empty end-dew can and placed the bread next to it. Good enough, I thought to myself before going to bed. I woke up to my dad pounding on my bedroom door. I groaned. It was 8 o'clock on a Saturday. What could he possibly want? "What, Dad?" I snapped. "Did you drink all the milk?" Looked at the gallon jug sitting on my dresser. No, I didn't drink any milk. I could hear him talking to himself, clearly confused as to where it went. I heard him walk back downstairs. I didn't get out of bed until I heard his car leave. He would be at work until dinner time, meaning I had the day to myself. I checked my YouTube channel, nearly 200 subscribers. It was growing, but I needed it to grow faster. Why won't this channel explode already? I wish it would just start growing. I didn't get it. It was a reaction channel. People loved reaction channels. I had funny jokes and insightful ideas. I must be shadow banned. I texted Audrey asking her if she wanted to come over while my parents were at work. She replied, "Sure. How was your first night with Junior?" Oh crap. I had forgotten about that little monkey thing. I ran back upstairs. It was missing. Audrey would be pissed if I lost it. I frantically searched the room, but it was no use. I wish that thing would show itself. I sat on the bed, dreading Audrey's arrival. "Do you really wish to see me?" I jumped at the sound. It was like a whisper on the wind. "Who's there? Show yourself." The whisper returned, "As you wish." I heard a dragging noise from under my bed. I quickly pulled my legs up. The noise grew louder. That disgusting little thing crawled out from under my bed. It turned its head around backwards and looked up at me. I screamed. It was terrifying. "Are you not pleased with your wish?" I pulled out my phone. I texted Audrey. "Did you lace that thing with drugs?" She texted back right away. "No, of course not. Why?" I looked back at the filthy thing on my floor. "Just not feeling the best. Better stay home today." She replied, but I didn't bother looking at it. I had more important things to deal with. "Are you pleased with your wish?" I shook my head. "Not at all." "What of your first wish?" The monkey freak stiffly sat and crossed his dry legs. He looked up at me with those soulless eyes. "I need to please you, master." My phone beeped. It was a notification from YouTube, a congratulatory message for reaching 100,000 subscribers. I nearly dropped the phone. "Are you pleased?" the thing asked. I looked from the phone to him in disbelief. "This was you? You did this?" It nodded. "What else can you do?" "Whatever you need, are you pleased?" I nodded. The thing let out a creepy little smile before bowing his head. "Your wish is my command, master." My head was swirling. I couldn't think. I got to my feet and ran out the door into the hallway. Deciding I needed some fresh air, I went outside for a walk. I found myself at the boathouse. Going inside, I was surprised to see Audrey sitting there. "Hey, what's up?" She looked up in surprise. She brushed a loose hair from her face. "Hey, how are you feeling?" To be honest, I was a little queasy. I told her as much. She looked sympathetic. "Shouldn't you be at home resting?" Before I could answer, that damn voice whispered in my ear, "Let me cure you." I jumped at the sound, startling Audrey. "What?" she demanded. I looked around the boathouse. It was just the two of us, and Audrey clearly hadn't heard the voice. I searched for the right thing to say. I thought I heard something, but it was nothing. "You're right. I should be at home resting." After a quick kiss on the cheek, I rushed back home. I felt like I was losing my mind. I barely registered my dad's car in the driveway. I burst through the front door, nearly knocking him over. "Geez, Josh, slow down." I ignored him and stomped upstairs. I slammed my bedroom door. Hands trembling, I pulled the gross little monkey carcass out from under my bed. "Okay, this is crazy. Are you alive, monkey?" If anyone saw me now, they would think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. The stuffed abomination didn't move. I sighed in relief. I wanted to try one more thing. I wish I had $10,000. Nothing seemed to happen. I laughed in relief. It had been a dream, or maybe a hallucination from the decomposition gases leaking off the monkey. I didn't care. I was just glad it was over. I didn't notice the footsteps until it was too late. I had left my door unlocked and my dad walked in. "Hey Josh, your mum and I have been getting calls from your school. They're worried you're falling behind." I wanted to scream, but that would have only made him more annoying. I knew it would be a waste of my time, but I tried to explain to him yet again. "Come on, Dad. We've been over this. Times have changed. School doesn't teach you anything. Is there a how to pay your taxes class? Nope. Just junk about history and cells. I've got my future figured out. School is just a legal obligation for now." The way he looked down and rubbed his temples was all the warning I needed. "Damn it, Josh. I took this afternoon off to talk to you about this, which isn't something I could afford to do, and do you know why? Because I have to bust my ass hanging sheetrock because I never made it to high school. I don't want you to be in the same boat." I jumped from my bed, all my carefully contained emotions rising to the surface. "Guess what, Dad? I never asked to be born. I never asked for you to give up your great life to pay for me. You chose to do that, and I don't owe you anything for it. I wish you and Mom would just stay out of my life." I tried to calmly leave the room, but he grabbed my arm. My brain shorted out for a moment. He had never laid a hand on me before. I never would have thought my own dad would get physical. "You can't keep running away, Josh. Life is going to catch up to you." I pulled my arm free from his grip. I rubbed it, knowing it would bruise. I didn't need him. I didn't need this place. My channel was blowing up. I was going to make more in a week than he did in a year. I decided to get in the last word before leaving. "When you're old and broken, I hope you remember this moment. I'm going to be famous and you're going to die early and alone, I know it." To his credit, he didn't try and abuse me any further. As I left the house, doubt started to creep up. I didn't have a license or a place to stay. If I didn't keep up my upload routine, my channel might suffer. My fans would only be patient for so long. I saw a paper bag stuffed into our hedge. I don't know what made me think to grab it. I was curious, I guess. When I opened it, I nearly dropped the bag. Stacked inside the bag were neatly bound rolls of $100 bills. I could no longer deny it. This was my path forward. Such divine intervention could only mean that I was meant to go on my own and start my career. Should I tell Audrey? It wasn't even a question. She had always had my back. I called her and told her to meet me at the boathouse. It took her longer than it should have to show up, but when she finally arrived, I could barely contain myself. I'm doing it, Audrey. I'm moving out and starting my YouTube career. Her smile kind of faltered. It was only for a second, but it was enough that I noticed. What? Aren't you happy for me? She rushed up to me. Of course I'm happy, Josh. I just don't want things to not work out. That's a huge step. I couldn't believe it. After all this time, she didn't really believe in me. I threw the paper bag at her. Look in there. It's my first YouTube payment. I'll be getting that monthly. Still doubt me? It was a lie, but there was no way she could have known that. I just needed her to know I had what it takes. Her eyes widened at the sight of the cash. Josh, that's incredible. I didn't know the channel had grown so much. She looked at me, and I wasn't doubting you. I just don't want to see you hurt. I pulled her in close. I can get you anything you want. Anything in the world. Would you like that? I could still see the doubt in her eyes, the way she was stiff against me. She didn't believe me. I would show her. Sure, Josh. What do your parents think about this? I let go of her. Of all the things to bring up right now, she had to talk about them. I don't care what they think. I'm practically an adult and can clearly take care of myself. Audrey didn't look convinced. She didn't even look happy. She was ruining my moment. It's whatever, Audrey. Just go back to school if you don't care. She pushed me away. Fine, be that way. I'm just trying to be reasonable. The instant she left, regret filled me. I called out after her. I even looked outside, but she was gone. I had to make it right. I could give her anything. So I called out, "Hey, monkey bitch, your master is calling." A cold breeze caressed my face. I knew I wasn't alone. I need to make things better with Audrey. My voice died. What exactly did she like other than me? Wishing she had me would be pointless, but it didn't have to be a physical gift. She'd always be self-conscious about certain things. I could take that away for her, or I could fix it. She would no longer feel inadequate, and I would have an even hotter girlfriend. Okay, monkey, don't mess this up. Listen very closely. I want you to give Audrey the body of a model and a love for crop-top shirts. I felt like I deserved that second part. After all, Audrey was going to get something that would normally take months of dedicated work, if not surgery. You can handle that, right? That sickly voice whispered in my ear, as well as I did your earlier wish. A fantastic idea entered my head. I would go back to school, just for a day. I had a few things to wish into reality. I decided I would need a full day for what I had planned. Finding a place to sleep sucked at first. Motels wouldn't rent me a room without an ID or credit card. I wouldn't go home, so I had no choice but to wish for an invitation to the biggest house around. The mayor and her stupid perfect twins, Jack and Jill. Yeah, she was that kind of parent. Jack was the football captain and Jill was a cheerleader. It was gross how easy success came to them. I hated them. All the more reason to mess with them. Monkey bitch, I wish Jack De Los Santos would invite me to stay at his house. I shivered as a cold breath ran down my neck. But my phone went off. It was a text from an unknown number. Hey, this is Jack, from school. I know this is a little sudden, but would you like to crash on my couch? I literally could not stop laughing. That dumb jock had no idea what was coming. Next, I made him come and pick me up. After an admittedly awkward dinner, I felt like it was bedtime. On my way to the guest room, Jill stopped me. She stood in the middle of the hallway with her arms crossed. I hated how perfect her hair looked. I hated how hot she was. I couldn't stand how she got everything she had ever wanted. Spill the beans, Josh. How did you get invited here? Do you have some dirt on Jack? I couldn't help but smirk. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Oh, it's nothing like that. He's just a big fan of my YouTube channel, and as a fan, he wanted to hang out. Jill made an exaggerated puking motion. Police, dude. Jack hardly even watches YouTube. We have this thing called a life. At least now I knew who would be the first to be humbled tomorrow at school. I attempted to brush past her. After all, it was clear I was beyond this conversation. But as I did, she put a shoulder into my chest, painfully halting me. Whatever it is you think you're doing, stop it right now. I couldn't tell if she was threatening me or trying to seduce me. Either way, she had gone too far. I stepped around her and went into the guest room. After closing the door, I flopped onto the bed. I lay there thinking about all the different ways I would make her regret her attitude. For probably the first time in my life, I woke up on time and was excited to go to school. I texted Audrey, "Can't wait to see you in class." She sent something back, but I had other things to deal with. People's mouths hung open when I jumped out of Jack's Mustang. I tipped him $100 just to let everyone know who the big boss was. I strode through the crowd with a confidence I know they felt. This was going to be a great day. I started with Miss Marinoni. She really did try her best and was easily the prettiest teacher I had ever seen. For her, I wished her student loans would be lost and that she would get a raise. Of course, Stanley was ogling her. I mean, we all liked to look, but that fat bitch was just staring at her. Well, he would have to learn. I wished he would say the thoughts in his head. Stanley jumped to his feet and yelled, "Miss Marinoni, I would please you all night if I had the chance." Miss Marinoni turned away from the whiteboard, and with one hand on her hip, she pointed to the door with the other. "Principal's office right now. That is not acceptable." I was the only one laughing, which was a little awkward, but whatever. I was surprised Audrey wasn't in class. She would have been right there alongside me. Then I remembered her text. I pulled out my phone. "Sorry, Josh, I'm not going to make it in today. I don't feel right." Of course she would be sick on a day like today. I almost texted her back that the girl flu isn't a real disease, but choose not to. When lunchtime rolled around, I took full advantage. Aries puked for all those times he called me names. Raphael slipped and was covered in food for that time he tripped me in middle school. The cheer table, aka Bitch Central, had every member simultaneously blow milk out of their noses. By the end of lunch, my sides hurt from all the laughing. When we were released, Jill was waiting for me in the hallway. She stepped into a dark classroom. "Come here a minute, handsome." While I hadn't wished for this, it was a welcome outcome to my obvious charm. I had a brief thought about Audrey as I entered the dark room, but rationalize it wouldn't matter. Jill's seductive voice called to me from deeper in the room. I couldn't see a thing. "A little farther, Joshua." I was so ready, and then multiple sets of hands grabbed me, covered my mouth, and began to beat me. I tried to call out. I tried to wish it away, but they had a firm grasp over my mouth. The beating went on forever. My ribs and abs were bruised and possibly broken. And then they all left the room, like it had been a totally normal thing. Jill spat on my face as she walked past. I lay there crying. They had ruined my day. Violence was totally uncalled for, but if that's what they wanted, I could oblige. The first to suffer would be Jill. She was someone that I always hated. She acted so above others, so properly dressed and spoken. I couldn't stand her, and now she had tricked me into an assassination attempt. There was a reason why I was the most successful kid at school. I had what took to make it. All she had was looks, and that's what I would take in retribution for her acts against me. Monkey. I wish for Jill Della Santos to fall and break her nose and knock out her teeth while we're at it. That sickly breath caressed me for a second. Then I heard a clattering down the hall, followed by a wail of pain. I couldn't hold in the smile. Jill had gotten what she deserved. The school nurse rushed past me, no doubt, to try and assist Jill in her time of need. I turned and nearly ran right into Principal Powers. "Josh, could I speak with you for a moment?" Panic flooded through me. I was standing right here. I had nothing to do with it. Powers raised an eyebrow. "Nothing to do with what? Jill tripping?" I turned and ran. He was onto me. I ignored his yells about a phone call from home. No matter what he had to say, I didn't want to hear it. I left the school building. Things had gone horribly. I needed to get away. Police cars flew past me. I tried to hide my face. I felt like the whole town was looking at me. At the first chance I had, I ran to the boathouse. Audrey was there. She spun around when she heard me. "Josh!" She didn't look happy to see me. She looked terrified. "Hey, you said you were sick. What gives?" Audrey had been crying. "Josh, please, just go." It was then I noticed the bundle behind her. I walked closer, and Audrey jumped in front of me. "Josh, I'm begging. Please just go. I'll never say no to anything again. I'll do anything you ask, and you won't have to worry about anything. Just please leave." There was blonde hair spilling out of a rolled-up rug. I turned to Audrey. "What did you do?" She broke down crying. Of all the things to do, she chose the least helpful. I woke up this morning and she was laying on my bedroom floor. She's a model I follow on Instagram, and somehow I have her body. So I panicked. I rolled her up and was going to dump her body in the ocean when you showed up. I was both horrified and impressed. Then I was furious. That dumb monkey had literally given Audrey the body of Model. "Don't worry about it, Audrey. Go home. I'll have this taken care of so you'll never have to worry about it." She looked up at me confused, so I repeated, "Go home, Audrey." Showing some decent common sense, for the first time she did as I said. Once alone, I spoke again. "You dumb little shit, that is not what I wished for. Now listen carefully. I want this body." I pointed to the body in front of me. "And the rug it is wrapped in to travel in such a way that there is no trail to the moon." I barely had the words out when, with a whoosh of air, the body and rug flew through the roof of the boathouse. The vacuum of their departure pulled me forward, and I ended up splashing into the frigid water. I gasped as icy salt water filled my mouth. Inadvertently, I filled my lungs with the same water. I managed to splash my way over to the ladder and started to climb up. My mind was racing with all the things I would say to that useless sack of fur. Right then the ladder broke and I plunged back into the water. This time I kept my mouth shut. I swam under the boathouse to the shore. My phone was ruined, my clothes were wet, and I was freezing. The De Los Santos house wasn't far. I made my way there despite the universe working against me. I walked right into the stupid boomer house. No one was home, so I grabbed some food from the kitchen and after a shower went to the spare bedroom. I woke up in the morning to Jack standing in my doorway. "I don't know why I invited you here, but the least you could do is hang up your towel when you're done." He threw my damp towel from the night before on my bed before leaving. I wondered why he wasn't at school on a Friday morning. Getting dressed out of my newly wish-filled closet, I made my way downstairs. Jill and her mum were sitting at the breakfast table. Jill was being fed through a tube. Apparently her jaw was wired shut. She had gone through a facial surgery the night before to stabilize her orbital bones and would need a few more over the next couple weeks. I think I did a pretty good job of hiding my happiness. At least the monkey had pulled through on this wish. Her mum had to go dick around ruining things like all boomer politicians do, so Jack was staying home to give Jill her pain meds. I thought about wishing for the pain meds to be useless, but chose to be merciful. It was around midday. I had just uploaded a new reaction video to my channel, a no doubt sure to be viral video, truly some of my best work. I went downstairs to grab a zesty drink to recharge after work. Jill was sitting on the couch all stiff like a weirdo. She must have heard me, because although she couldn't turn her head or her eyes, she gestured for me to come closer. Warily I did so. She held out a folded up paper. Written with embarrassingly bad penmanship was the sentence, "Sorry about yesterday." "Words don't undo bad actions," I told her before returning upstairs. While admitting fault showed some character growth, she still had a long ways to go. I was on my phone scrolling through YouTube looking for the next video to react to when a text notification blocked the top of my screen. I groaned in frustration. Audrey wanted to call me. I was busy at the moment but knew I needed to make time for her. She answered on the first ring. "Josh, we need to talk." "Yeah, babe, that's what we're doing." I could almost see her grinding her teeth. "Josh, this is really serious. Have you been home at all today?" I didn't like where this was going. "No, I told you I moved out. I'm at a mansion now." "Josh, forget all that. 3 white Tahoes showed up at school today. The guys driving them looked really mean. I heard they came from your house, and then they came to mine. They had all kinds of questions about you. I told them we had broken up a few weeks ago, and I think they bought it. Be honest with me, Josh. Where did that money come from?" The sweetness of her lying for me was squashed by her not trusting me. "Babe, go look at my YouTube account. It's clearly from there." "Josh, your channel is gone." In a panic, I hung up and opened YouTube again. My account was suspended. I logged out and tried to look up my channel. It was gone. All that hard work gone just like that. I had put my heart into growing the channel, and now it was gone because of bot subscribers. That worthless monkey hadn't shown my channel to people. He had fake accounts subscribed to it. This was the second time he had messed up. This time was the worst yet. I would have to call Audrey back at some point, but first I needed to check something. The paper bag was still under the bed and still filled with cash. At least he had gotten one thing right. I was tempted to wish myself away to another country. Surely anywhere would be better than the 53rd world countries in a trench coat I currently lived in. But I didn't really trust the monkey's wish-granting abilities after the last 2 mistakes. He would have to earn my trust again. Mrs. De Los Santos made us all stroganoff for dinner. Jill had hers juiced and pumped into her. It totally killed the vibe. especially when Jack would lean over and wipe the excess from her chin. She's 16, she can wipe her own mess. Clearly they disagreed and shot me dirty looks when I suggested as much. Whatever, weird family. Unfortunately, by speaking, I apparently gave Mrs. De Los Santos permission to talk to me. Josh, I know you are a guest here, but I've had the school reach out. They want to make sure you are aware of the situation at home. I just nodded my head without looking up from my food. I knew what they meant. My parents were no doubt pushing to get me back into school, but I had transcended above that part of my life. She pushed a little more. And you're handling it, because the school has very good therapists. I helped vet them myself. What kind of weak ass needs therapy to move out? Jack spoke. Mom, what exactly happened? She shook her head. That's not for me to talk about. Jack nodded like a good little bitch, and dinner continued on. Say what you will, growing up with all that boomer privilege had turned into Mrs. De Los Santos into quite the cook. It was going to be a shame when I took over ownership of their house. Maybe I would keep her on as a maid. I'll even give Jill a chance at begging me to let her stay. Not wanting to waste the moment, I waited until breakfast Saturday morning. I stood and waited until all eyes were on me. Then with a big smile I said, I wish I owned this house. They just looked at me. Mrs. De Los Santos said, it's a very lovely house. Lots of people would like to own it. My smile faltered. It hadn't worked. I spoke again, this time a little louder. I wish I owned this house right now and had the deed in my hand. I held up an empty hand. Mrs. De Los Santos put down her fork. Josh, sit and eat your food, please. You're 16, you won't be owning a house anytime soon. I sat feeling shame rise up in me. That stupid monkey made me look like an idiot. After breakfast, I went to my room. Show yourself, monkey! That putrid smell filled the room. I nearly yelled when I saw the stuffed abomination on my bed. Gross, dude, I have to sleep there. Why aren't you doing your job? I need those wishes. It stared at me with its creepy little eyes. Where is my food, master? You said you were pleased, but you did not give me my food. I was pissed. So that's what this is all about. You want some milk and bread? Just get your own. It smiled, and it was not a nice smile. I'll see you in hell, Josh. And then it was gone. The only thing left was the faint smell it left behind. I felt a chill run down my back. Ice-cold fear flooded my spine. Things were about to get really bad. I wanted to call my mum, but the ocean had ruined my phone and I didn't know her number. Walking home would take hours, and I wasn't feeling up to that. I hated living in a car-centric society. I wanted to wish for a driver's license, but I was scared the monkey would mess it up somehow. I was stuck. My only option was to take Jack or Jill's car. I summarized Jill wouldn't be needing her Jeep anytime soon. I found the keys on her dresser. It was a little weird going in her room. I wasn't sure what I expected, but paintings of horses and family portraits surely wasn't it. I managed to make it to the garage without being seen. This family really hated the environment. Parked between Jack's Mustang and Jill's Jeep was Mrs. De Los Santos's Escalade. They were single-handedly undoing any bit of good I might ever do. Screw the 1%. I got in the Jeep, put the keys in the ignition and turned it. Nothing happened. I wiggled the stick in the middle and still nothing happened. After a few minutes of pushing buttons and flipping switches, I gave up. I would have to get a different set of keys. I nearly ran into Jack as I was leaving the garage. I managed to smoothly hide the keys from him. Hey Josh, I was actually looking for you. He held up my phone. I found this on the bathroom counter. I was able to take it apart and clean it out. It's charged and working again. I took the phone tentatively, half expecting a trick. How would you know how to do that? I asked. Jack shrugged. I'm 2 years into my electrical engineering degree, but honestly it's pretty simple. Just a couple corroded connections. Go ahead and try it. Everything should work again. He left and I turned on my phone. Sure enough, it booted up, and despite a little fog in the camera lens, it seemed to be working fine. I tried calling my mum, but the call went to voicemail. I wanted to say something to her, something that would cause her to tell me everything was okay. Instead, I hung up. I was on my way to the spare room when Jack called me over to the living room. He was sitting on the couch next to stiff-necked Jill. On the TV was a news report. There was an ambulance at the high school football field. A reporter was talking to the camera about how a body had been found under the bleachers. She went on about other details that weren't important. Jack spoke. It was Aries. Trevor sent me a snap. They had him on a stretcher. He said he could overhear the medics talking about how he'd drown in his own vomit. I felt cold. I had to sit. Even Jill's creepy bloodshot eyes weren't so bad when listening to the drone of the reporter. Then the scene changed. It turned to a place I was very familiar with. My house. Cop cars and ambulances covered the street. Jack froze, his finger above the channel button. The bottom of the screen read, "Second death at local residence. Foul play suspected." I jumped to my feet. What do they mean, second death? Who was the first? Hell, who was the second? I slumped back onto the couch. Jill placed a hand on my shoulder. I elbowed her. I hadn't meant to hit her in the boob, but it was effective as she withdrew her hand instantly. "Hey!" yelled Jack. "That had better have been an accident." I think he knew it wasn't, but he also didn't want to start trouble with me. I needed to get home. I was so focused on solving that problem that I almost missed the next story. A body had been found on the roof of the Red Moon Bar and Grill, a body belonging to a fairly well-known Instagram influencer. I swore internally, what if the body still had Audrey's DNA on it? What if they brought her in for questioning and she turned on me? Could I be charged? There was no way to connect me to the body, only Audrey's word. But what if that was enough? Shit was spiraling out of control. I couldn't go to prison. It would kill my career. It would be the end of everything I had built. Jack was talking. I didn't hear him at first. "Yo, Josh, are you listening?" I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. "I'll drive you home, Josh. Come on, let's go." I nodded. I needed to know what happened at my house. Jack patted Jill on the shoulder. "Hang in there. I'll be right back." Weirdos. It didn't take long to get across town in Jack's Ego Mobile. Who buys a green car? Seriously. Jack pulled up to my house. "You gonna be all right, dude? I can hang out for a minute if you need me to." There was still a news van parked in front of my house. The fire trucks and ambulances had left, but cops were everywhere. Remembering the body Audrey had drug into the boathouse, I began to worry they had made some connection. "Let's just go. I don't want to be here." Jack looked uncertain. "Bro, it's okay to be scared. This isn't a normal thing for a teenager to go through." I glared back at him. Where did this privileged little prick get the idea that he knew more about suffering than I did? "Just drive, Jack." Without any more arguing, he did as he was told. When we were just a block from my house, a white SUV pulled behind us. Then another pulled out in front of us. Before I could react, Jack whipped his car onto the sidewalk. I screamed, fearing for my life. "What are you doing?" A rapid succession of pops filled the air. The back window broke and glass rained down on us. I looked out the rear and saw one of the SUVs right behind us and gaining fast. They were shooting at us. A guy with face and neck tattoos was standing up in the sunroof holding a gun. More pops rang out. I heard bullets thunk into the metal body of the car. At least it now had justification for the crappy misspelled decals saying bullet on the side. Tires screeched and the air smelled like burnt rubber as Jack hit the road again. My head was thrown painfully against the back of the seat. Jack weaved his way through streets and parking lots, our pursuers gradually falling behind. As if following a command, they both turned off from chasing us. I looked around us. "I think they've had enough," I said. Jack jerked his head in my direction. "Was that because of you? Did you get involved in something?" The way he demanded answers rubbed me the wrong way. "Of course not," I insisted. Jack was quiet. Finally, he stopped the car. "I'm going to the police. Are you coming with?" The way he said it without looking at me made it feel like an accusation. I threw open the door and jumped out of the smoking POS. "I'll walk from here. You go do whatever it is you think you need to." Jack didn't hesitate. He drove off at quick enough pace to close the door. Whatever. I didn't need his car. His house was just up the road. I would go there, retrieve my money and leave town. It didn't take a genius to figure out my parents were gone. Audrey was likely heading to prison, and people were going to start pointing fingers at anyone who was different, and I was very different from all the losers in this town. Maybe I hadn't noticed them parked outside. Maybe they had hidden their cars. Either way, I walked right into the De Los Santos house with my guard down. My quick wit saved me, though. I heard voices coming from the living room. Wanting to know what they were saying and if it was about me, I crept closer. "Listen, girl, you can talk or we can make you talk," said a rough voice. A second, more mellow voice spoke up. "Come on, man. Can't you see her jaw is wired shut? She can't say anything." There was a pained whimper. Then the second voice spoke again. "Dude, wired shut. Undoing the wiring isn't going to fix whatever is broken. Get a pen and paper." The first man simply grunted. Footsteps led away. The remaining man spoke in a softer voice. "Listen, kid, he's going to come back, and if you don't give him what he wants, he's going to hurt you, or worse. We traced the license plate on the Mustang to this address. We just want what's ours. Can you help with that?" The money, they were here to take my money, and that idiot Jack had given them all they needed in order to find me. I needed to go. I needed to get to the money before anyone else ratted me out. If they took it, I would be stuck in this dead-end town. I ran for the stairs. They must have been distracted because no one came after me. I pulled the money out from under my bed. It was all there. I could still pull this off. Knowing Jill had likely cracked by now, I made my way out the window and onto the roof. Rich assholes like the De Los Santos like to have trees all around their house. I used one of them to climb down. I just needed a way out of town now. Surely the roads would be a mess, but the water wouldn't. With a hint of a plan in my head, I made my way down the streets and towards the waterfront. I thought I heard a female scream, but I could have been mistaken. There was no way Jill would have waited that long to give me up. When I reached the shoreline, I saw what I needed. A speedboat at the fuel station. The owner was inside the shack talking with the deadbeat service provider. I could do it. I had to do it. Anyone in my position would do the same. I couldn't go to jail. I couldn't give up my money. No, I deserved a future, and if that meant depriving some rich guy of his toy, then I morally had no choice. It was easier than I had expected. The boat was idling with just a single bow rope holding it. I was halfway across the marina before anyone even noticed. By that point, it was too late. I felt the breeze in my face. I started to laugh. Despite the odds being against me, despite the system being rigged to hold me down, I had done it. I was going to succeed. Out of curiosity, I opened the glove box. I wanted to know who the previous owner had been. Inside was a note. It was handwritten on old parchment. "Run ye east or west. Never shall you rest. My pound of flesh I shall consume, until you, Master Josh, approach your doom. That damn monkey wasn't going to let me escape." Story 2. Over the last week, I know you've all been scared. If you're a teenager reading this, 13 to 18, I'm not writing this to scare you more. I want to tell you the truth. The televised press conference we all just watched terrified me, but I'm here to tell you the experts are afraid of telling you the truth. This isn't intentional. They're just as scared as we are. They're terrified. Not knowing what this thing is or how to stop it terrifies them. But this sickness affecting the teenage population is not new. It infected my town this time last year and took my brother. Those who do know what it is tried to burn us to the ground to stop it from spreading. I spent half a year in a facility in their attempt to extract whatever this is from my veins. Cruel procedures drilling into me and testing my bone marrow. But it's already around you. It's in the air, melded into your brains. It's November 28th, so you're already feeling it. It's not like fomites, anything you can catch. It's deeper than that. I don't think I can describe just how this thing spreads without sounding out of my mind. This thing is going to spread. You've seen it on the news, right? It's contagious, except not in the way you think. But it's not going to kill you. Kill you permanently anyway. If I'm honest, I wish it did kill us. I wish it killed me. OC, California, was what my younger self had called a sunshine state. Our little town, just on the edge of the coast, was paradise. Aside from winter weather and the occasional freak storm, I had grown up in the sun. I had known the beach my whole life, the soft sand underfoot and between my toes. The shallows I waded into every morning without fail, trailing after my older brother and his friends, chasing the surf under shallow pinks streaked across the sky. I knew salt and sweat, Ray-Bans perched on my head, the grossness of sunscreen gluing my hair to my neck, the memories of sandcastles, and the relentless yet beautiful scorch of the sun on my skin. The heat clashing with the coolness of the sea as I dipped under, waiting for that one wave that would toss me into the air, sending me spiraling with the ocean itself before tumbling me back down into the depths. The surf that eventually carried me back to the shallows and spit me out to where Mom waited with ice cream, always ready to lather me in factor 50. Presently, I bit back a hiss when my school bus took yet another sharp turn, jerking my head into the window. I was slowly starting to regret my decision to come on this stupid school retreat. Why was it snowing? Leaning my head against the ice-cold glass, I could only stare outside, confusion and slight panic prickling up and down my spine. In the seat in front of me, Sarah Lakewood had sneezed again, a violent, wet-sounding sneeze, and refused to cover up her damn mouth. I was used to snow sometimes, like maybe a sprinkle or even just a few inches if we were lucky. In OC, California today, on Wednesday, November 22nd, 2023, sunny with a high of 75 degrees and a low of 61 degrees. That's what Alexa had said. Sunny, with cloudier conditions as we move into the afternoon. Pressing my face into the glass, I squinted through spiraling snowflakes that seemed abnormally large, thicker, already obstructing my view. I wouldn't exactly call this cloudy conditions. This was freak weather, the type I would expect to be on the national news or fear-mongering TikTok pages. I tried my phone again, still no signal. I did get one single bar when the bus stopped, and we got stuck in a snowdrift. I still wasn't sure how we were still alive, let alone why this driver kept going, but it was gone before I could try Mum's phone. There was barely any visibility outside, and I was having a hard time believing our driver when he assured us that everything was going to be fine. That slight shudder in his tone wasn't helping. This guy had no idea what the fuck he was talking about. The blanket of snow outside shouldn't have freaked me out as much as it did, but staring out into what would normally be golden landscapes and endless ocean, I only saw white. With my cheek uncomfortably pressed against the pane, I wrapped my jacket tighter around myself, surprised by my breath dancing in front of me in sharp wisps. I shouldn't have been shocked that the school couldn't afford heating on the bus. We were a tiny town, and most of our funding went into our sports department. However, the least they could do was supply half a dozen kids who were not used to this type of weather, this deep-rooted cold sliding into every bone in my body, with heat packs. I wasn't dressed for Arctic conditions. That morning, I was pretty sure my wardrobe would only be light sweaters and jeans. California weather could be spotty at times, but it was always a guarantee that we were never going to get a literal fucking snowstorm. Still, if I really strained my ears, I could maybe trick myself into believing the blizzard outside was, in fact, ocean waves crashing against a shore where I once felt safe. Summer. The familiar voice barely registered. I ignored it, curling into my seat and willing my body to stop shaking. I know you're ignoring me. I kept my focus on the snow piling up on the windows. The sheer amount that had fallen in just under an hour was almost impossible. I could already sense my classmates' chatter shift from TikTok and Twitch streamers to what the fuck is going on outside. I was also unlucky enough to get seated in front of Wes Cameron. I had to bite back a hiss when he kicked my seat yet again in an attempt to balance on his seat to get a perfect shot of the storm. He was acting like he'd never seen snow before, jabbering to his seatmate, who was currently my other least favorite person on this bus. Summer. That annoying voice had turned into a sing-song. Go away, I mimicked his taunt. I'm trying to sleep. You don't look asleep. I shifted in my seat, trying to get comfortable. Keyword, trying. Mom says you're not spending the holidays with us. So, I didn't turn around. That's not very festive of you, sis. When I didn't respond, he sighed. So you're going to ruin Christmas for everyone. Ouch, geez, man, you didn't have to do her like that. I wasn't expecting Wes to chime in, poking his head through the gap in my seat. He shot me a grin, and I shoved him away with a finger poke to the forehead. Ow! I wasn't sure what made me snap. Wes Cameron trying to squeeze his head through the very small gap in my seat, or the idea that my brother still believed in the magic of fucking Christmas when he treated the holidays like spring break. He wasn't even conscious for the special day a year prior, passed out on the beach after his holiday party went sideways. Since Mum was too embarrassed to acknowledge Wes's behaviour or admit it to our neighbours, I was the one running to and from our house, with a bath bucket and fresh cans of soda when everyone else was tucking into their Christmas dinners. Ah yes, the festive cheer of cleaning up your brother's puke. Dislodging myself from the window, I lifted my head to find the golden child himself looming over me, arms crossed, eyebrows raised, mimicking our mother. He was wearing a reindeer sweater, which was already a flashing red flag. The light-up antlers sticking out made me feel nauseous. The sweater was too big for him, baggy and hanging off his slim frame, definitely an attempt to get on Mum's good side. His bobble hat was a choice. Mum was obsessed with holiday-themed clothing. Fallon, or Fall, since apparently our parents were comedic geniuses with names, was exactly 1 year older than me. And despite his growing list of almost felonies, according to Mum, still the golden child, while I was the kid she avoided talking about during family gatherings, the socially awkward one who was just going through a phase. Mum named us after the seasons we were born under. While I was born in July, summer months, long days, and an increasingly painful pregnancy, thanks for the TMI, Mum, Fallon was born in the fall, under cozy red skies and fallen leaves. My brother was the literal fucking golden child, but I didn't blame her for giving up on me. Unlike my brother, who actually had a life, I had ditched surfing and the beach when I found my individuality, choosing to stay at home all day playing Stardew Valley. I didn't abandon the outside completely, but I did stop traipsing after my brother and his friends, finding comfort in my own room. The last time I hung out with my brother, Fallon left to get takeout pizza. I wanted to go with him, but he was crushing on a guy, and apparently, having his little sister third-wheeling was social death. I made the mistake of heading back to my brother's friends, who were complaining of my presence. They didn't want a 14-year-old kid hanging out with them, and I guess they were too polite to tell my brother. So I distanced myself. That was until I was forced to acknowledge his existence on this stupid field trip. Since his friends were joining us for the entire holiday, Mum insisting on this huge party bringing all our families together, my brother's friends were also invited. Hence, I was planning on spending my holidays elsewhere. My plan was to ignore Fallon's existence, and once the field trip was over, jump on a flight. However, the universe had other plans. It was pretty hard to ignore him when he was clinging to my seat, our janky bus rocking him side to side. Fallon and I were like carbon copies of our mother and father. While I had inherited Mom's brunette curls and darker complexion, Fallon was a pale redhead. You could see the resemblance, if you squinted. It was mostly in our eyes and the shape of our faces. According to someone in class, we had the exact same resting bitch face. The same one he was pulling at that moment, eyebrow cocked, lips pricked into a slight smile. I quickly decided that I hated his stupid fucking reindeer sweater, another ploy to get on Mom's good side. Fallon loved family interventions, especially when he was the one holding them. I decided to humor him, trying to ignore our growing audience. I'm not interested in playing happy families. I spoke through what I hoped was a gritted smile. I could already feel my cheeks growing warm, and it wasn't even a relief. It was uncomfortable warm, like sticking your head in an oven. Can we talk about this later? Mum told me to talk to you. It was always Mum says with him. Geez, it was like talking to a toddler. I have nothing to say, I said. It's just 2 weeks. You can survive without me, Fallon. Fallon folded his arms. So, where are you going? Florida, I said. I have friends I'm staying with. I hated the way he smirked, like what I was saying couldn't be true. Friends? I met them on a Discord server. He curled his lip, yet another momism. You're 15. I rolled my eyes. They're my age, Fallon. When the bus jerked again, this time setting off a cacophony of cries behind us, my brother was oddly calm, tightening his grip on my seat. Okay, well, his voice wobbled when he was violently thrown backwards, only just managing to keep his balance. Can you at least let me drive you? Fallon Cartwright, our driver shouted, tackling the wheel, snow pounding down on the windshield. Please sit down. Fallon shot me a look, his eyes widening. I knew exactly what he was thinking. Since when did a random bus driver know my brother's name? I think I was about to question it, amused and maybe a little panicked. Maybe this guy knew our mother. She was a well-known name in the town, after all. I remember reaching out and grabbing his arm, wrapping my hand around his wrist and tugging him into the seat next to me. But in the corner of my eye, the driver fucking exploded. I don't mean he burst into meaty chunks, a total gore-fest. I mean 1 minute he was there, frantically trying to brush snow from the windscreen with his bare hand, sticking his head out of the window, and in a single disorienting moment, pop, and he was gone, exploding into a vivid red mist. Summer? Fallon's voice was barely scratching the surface of my mind when I was staring at what almost reminded me of stardust, a crimson tide of red sparkles suspended in the air, lightly coating the driver's seat. It took me half a second to realize that somehow this man had just spontaneously combusted, and it slowly began to dawn on me that nobody was driving the bus. The world turned mute. Voices were ocean waves slamming into my skull. Outside, I could just make out the jagged edge of a cliff we were careening towards, the bus swerving again and sending my classmates into a fresh panic. In that moment, I wanted to be the hero, jumping forward to grab the wheel myself and steer us from the cliff face we were teetering on the edge of. But I could only sit there, paralyzed, dazed, watching the road get narrower and narrower. It reminded me of going through the tunnel in that old Willy Wonka movie. No light, no hope, just darkness slowly enveloping us. I never felt the bus tip over the edge. Initially, it was a single sharp jerk that slammed my head into the window. I should have felt the lurch, the weightlessness as I was hurled forward and propelled off my feet, and the crushing force of 50,000 megatons of steel obliterating my internal organs. I remember screams erupting and something wet hitting me in the face, followed by a blinding white light that grew brighter and brighter and brighter. When I think back, it felt like living in a movie, except the movie was ending in one vivid, fiery explosion so powerful that I was yanked from my body. I should have felt my death, but whatever death was, it spat me back out. I remember distantly thinking it must not have liked the taste. I awoke to wails and sobs, and my body lodged between two seats. I couldn't feel my legs. I couldn't feel anything, only a growing, numbing sensation severing my nerve endings. I didn't realize my mouth was already open in a silent scream, and I was choking up blood. When I managed to open my eyes, and keep them open, something was looming over me, swaying back and forth, back and forth. It was like a pendulum, hypnotizing me and lulling me to sleep, my eyes focusing and blurring, black spots growing big and small, big and small. Summer! Someone was shaking me, prodding my face. I felt their fingers try to find a pulse in my neck and wrist, but I still couldn't feel my legs. I sensed someone's breath in my face, unusually warm, dancing across my cheeks. When they coughed, I assumed fumes, but I wasn't expecting something warm and wet to coat my face. Fuck. The voice suddenly had an identity, my muddled brain briefly finding clarity. Summer, stay with me, all right? Wes Cameron knelt in front of me, slapping my face, trying to keep me awake, and when I did open my eyes, I ignored his frantic gaze and blood-speckled lips, focusing on the weird, swinging object dancing above his head. It was too big to be a backpack. Flickering in and out of view, I could see the twisted, mangled skeleton of our bus wrapped around me, crushing my chest in a suffocating embrace. "I've got you!" Wes's cry was labored with sobs. I could feel his hands on me, another disorienting wave of dizziness, and then, "I did it!" His sharp breath barely grazed my ears before I could feel the numbing cold underneath me, blood pooling around the wreckage. Wes didn't hesitate, wrapping me into an awkward hug and violently wrenching me from where I was wedged between what was left of the crumpled seats and window. Lying on my back, I saw the carnage from a different angle. I followed the intense red smear. It was so cold, and there was so much pain, coming in sharp pulses rattling my body. But I could feel my legs. They were intact, folded underneath me. Wes gently pulled me into a sitting position. Blood ran from my nose, my mouth, my ears, choking me, but I was alive. When my gaze found the swinging shape looming over me, it hit me that I wasn't looking at an object lit up by the bus emergency lights. I was staring at what was left of a bright green holiday sweater, illuminated antlers illuminating a reindeer nose that was now soaked in red. Delusional, I remembered it hadn't been Rudolph before. I only saw the torso, and that was enough. It didn't fully register that it was my brother's corpse swinging back and forth until someone, Wes, grabbed my shoulders and forced me to look at him. Fallon was dead. I wasn't sure what grieving was yet, or even how you were supposed to react to a death. But in that intimate moment where it was just me and my tumultuous thoughts, that poisonous and selfish part of me could only think of one single word. Finally. And then it well and truly fucking hit me. Fallon was dead. Fallon wasn't coming back. Sound came in and out like whooshes of air. Wes's lips were moving, but all I could hear was my frenzied heartbeat. Before. Whoosh. "Hey!" Wes's voice was loud and invasive. "Look at me!" I didn't look at him. I looked at my brother. Corpse. His corpse. Somebody was screaming. It wouldn't stop. Distantly, I realized it was me. I was screaming. The noise was horrifying, a shrill screech exploding in my skull. "Summer, we need to get out of here." Wes's heavy breaths hit my face. Warm arms were already wrapping around me, pulling me like a doll out of the wreckage and straight into swirling snowflakes. It was still snowing. The thought felt muddled and wrong as I sat on my knees, shivering and numb, at a loss for words. Around me was a cacophony of my screaming classmates, some missing limbs, others barely alive, pleading for death. Fallon was still in there, my thoughts screamed. I didn't see a head. I didn't see his full dead body, so maybe. I was already on my knees, crawling through blanketed white, before another pair of arms held me back. I didn't know her name, Poppy or Holly or something like that. The girl dropped down in front of me, her eyes wide and unseeing. She had been on the track team. I vaguely remembered her from our yearbook, always at the front of every photo, always smiling, her blonde ponytail swinging and doll-like smile perpetually picture-perfect. Now her blonde hair hung in scarlet, tangled rat tails glued to her face. "Did you see it?" The girl's words caught me off guard, sending me shuffling back. The bus driver exploding into red mist. She saw it too. When she came closer, so close her breath prickled my face, I noticed blood seeping from her lips and dribbling down her chin. The girl coughed, and I found myself with a face full of bloody mucus. She was ill. She wasn't just shivering from the cold. If her feverish skin and bloodshot eyes were any indication, I didn't respond. She slowly got to her feet, swaying from side to side as she stumbled away, muttering to herself. Holly coughed again, this time covering her mouth, and then stared down at her blood-streaked palm, her lip wobbling. Holly was sick, I thought, dizzily. In a daze, I think I batted her bloody snot from my cheeks, but I don't think I cared. I sat there for a long time, waiting for Fallon to appear from the wreckage. Wes finally dropped down in front of me, grasping my hands. I hadn't fully taken in his injuries until that moment, noticing the scary-looking gash slicing through his forehead, his thick brown curls hanging in half-lidded eyes. He was mostly intact, but each of his words accompanied a violent cough, his chest wheezing. Oh, the thought was like a wave crashing into me. Wes was sick too. His lips parted and then moved, shaping into what I could only guess was sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Summer," but I couldn't hear him this time. Instead, I was wondering why his hands were so warm, slick and sweaty, tangled with mine, while I was ice cold. I found my voice when I was able to stand, breathing into my hands to stay warm. "You don't look so good," I told him, and to my surprise he laughed. Then coughed, this time into his hands, and then wiping them on his jacket. "Neither do you!" There were approximately 9 survivors, out of 20 kids on our bus. The majority of our class were dead, but that fact had yet to sink in. I was still looking for familiar faces among the shadows of the survivors. It quickly became apparent that we were on our own. There was no signal, and when we did manage to find a single bar, 911 was disconnected. Kids started to panic, but I just kept telling myself it was because of the weather. This snow was unprecedented, not what our town was used to. So, of course, our emergency lines would be busy. Elizabeth Banks, however, made sure to keep reminding me that the emergency lines were not busy. They were dead. Wes took over as our leader, announcing that we weren't that far away from home. He was right. Even with the snow, I could still make out where our bus had toppled down a shallow embankment. So, gathering as many resources as possible, we started the hike back to town while doing our best to haul the injured on makeshift stretchers. I was lucky to be able to walk, driven by pure adrenaline. I dreaded seeing my mother and explaining that Fallon wasn't coming back. Somehow, she would make it all my fault. I was already rehearsing the words in my head. "I'm sorry, Mum. I'm so sorry I couldn't save him." There was no right way to tell my mother her son was never coming back. And yet again, that selfish part of me didn't want to. Why was it my responsibility? Why was I trying to fucking apologize? Wes's initial idea was to hitchhike back to town, but when we got back onto the main road, we realized that was not going to happen. Traffic had simply stopped, cars crashing into each other, jamming the road. It's because of the snow, I told myself. Wes and 2 other guys were already checking each car, their faces growing progressively paler. We could have blamed it on the treacherous conditions. In fact, we tried to at first. Our town had never experienced snow like this, the type that grounds entire cities to a halt and freezes people in cars. I was knee-deep in snowdrifts, wading towards a flipped-over Ranger, when Dom Hudson voiced my thoughts. "Where is everyone?" he spoke up. cutting through that unnerving silence and voicing what none of us wanted to acknowledge. I poked my head into each car and found exactly the same thing. The seatbelts were still in place. Wes was already losing his cool, his voice breaking. "We're okay," he announced, his tone saying the opposite. "It's probably because of the storm. I'm sure everyone's evacuated." He didn't have to voice his conclusion after checking every car in the vicinity, because we all knew it. None of these drivers had left their seats. It wasn't until I stuck my head in a fancy Prius did the magnitude of the situation truly hit me. Just like with our bus driver, I found myself staring at sparkling red mist splattering the steering wheel. Wes had an answer, or at least what he thought was one. He was trying to find logic and science, when I was pretty sure we were looking at spontaneous human combustion on a catastrophic scale. I had no idea just how widespread it was until we reached home in the early hours of the morning. I couldn't tell what time. It was still snowing, and by then we were up to our knees in it. The whole town had come to a grinding halt. I went straight home in a panic that turned to dread at the sight of our wide-open front door. Alexa cheerfully greeted me with, "Welcome home. The time is 3 a.m. on Thursday, November 23rd, and the temperature is currently 15 degrees with a real feel of 7 degrees. Water was running upstairs. When I stumbled up to the landing, I stepped straight into suds flooding the bathroom. I turned off the faucet, my hands shaking. Mum was running a bath. I could see exactly what she was doing and what was left behind. The TV was still switched onto the weather channel, her laptop open on the coffee table, our school's website on display. Her phone was on the floor, the screen shattered. But I saw my name between the cracks. Summer. She tried to call me 54 fucking times. Hesitantly, I followed the trail, backtracking into the main hallway where a glass of wine lay shattered on the floor. Dropping to my knees, I dragged my fingers across the carpet. The same red smear clung to each fiber. I didn't want to admit that the scarlet smudge on our hallway carpet was my mother and not her wine, or that before she exploded, she had been desperately trying to contact me. Going into shock again, I did everything I could to distract myself. I checked the refrigerator and pantry, taking note of every item. We still had power, so I grabbed my mum's phone and tried once again to reach an emergency line. I washed my face once, twice, 3 times, 4, scrubbing at my face until my skin was raw. I felt like I was caked in him. When I pulled out my ponytail, I could feel him stuck in my hair and glued to my neck. Fallon was dead. Mum was dead. I spent hours in the shower, hours I don't even remember, sitting with my knees to my chest, trying to imagine if I had only pulled Fallon into his seat sooner. He would be with me, trying to calm me down, the logic in this fucked up mess. The survivor's guilt was eating me alive. I was alone. Still, though, I found comfort in my usual bedtime routine, trying to ignore the excited screaming from outside. Younger kids were running in the snow way past their bedtime, happy or hysterical, and still not fully registering that their parents were dead. Hours passed by, and I was already expecting my mother to come yell at me for not being asleep, or placing warm milk with honey by my bedside. But I was alone inside a freezing cold house that was no longer home. I started to break apart. I tried and failed to sleep in my room. It was supposed to be my safe place, but it felt simultaneously too big and like the walls were closing in. I tried Fallon's, and I couldn't even step over the threshold. Everything was still exactly where he'd left it, like he was coming back. I hadn't been in his room for a while, and he'd revamped it. Fallon's personality was lit up in every Marvel movie poster, in his surfboards hanging from the walls. His bedroom didn't make sense against the backdrop of the storm outside. Heavy, blanketed white clashing with his beaded curtains and multicolored beach towels. I could see unfinished college applications on his desk, his laptop still open, frozen on the Minecraft menu screen. Before the field trip, he'd stuck his head through my door. "Yo, do you want to hang out? I'm setting up Minecraft right now." I ignored him, corking in my headphones. I never told him about his friends because I didn't want to fuck up our relationship. But I had fucked it up. I pushed him away. Closing my brother's door, I went back to the dark red stain on the hallway carpet. I don't even remember curling up, passing out right there. When I woke up, it was daylight and it was still snowing. I was almost snowed in, stepping straight into untouched white. I was trying to make coffee when there were 3 singular knocks on the door. Wes, still in his pajamas and carrying a bag full of Dunkin' Donuts. "Want one? They're fresh from yesterday, so I'm handing them out." He thrust the bag in my face, his mouth full, chocolate dribbling down his chin. I noticed significant perspiration glistening on his forehead, soaking strands of hair glued to his skin. His eyes were bigger somehow. The proportions of his face were different. I had to be hallucinating or maybe concussed. But no. When I blinked rapidly, the boy's face was somehow narrower. He was either delirious from his fever or was slowly splintering apart mentally. When I hesitantly took a rainbow-sprinkled donut, his smile started to falter. He was trembling, barely able to keep himself upright. "There's a meeting in the school auditorium," he smiled, handing me a caramel donut too. "It starts at 12, so don't be late, all right?" I swallowed down donut bath. "Meeting?" He nodded. "Yep. There are around 200 of us, 13 to 18-year-olds. Whatever this thing is, it's sparing teenagers." He shrugged. "Well, that's our hypothesis anyway. Everyone over the age of 18 and under the age of 13 have..." Wes mimed an explosion with his hands, his eyes growing manic. "Bye-bye." His words felt like knives pricking into my back. "Everyone," I managed to spit out. "Yep, everyone." His expression darkened, and I started to see the splinters in his mask, his lips curling. I found my parents reduced to red sludge, and my baby sister was her own flavor of strawberry shake in her crib. Wes's eyes widened, and he startled me with a choked laugh. "Wait." He ran his hands through his hair. "Do you think that's what it is? What if it's aliens turning us into milkshakes?" Wes laughed, holding out his palms, slick with red. "So, that's what this is, right? My little sis. She just turned into fucking Nesquik, man." I wondered if his fever was doing all of the heavy lifting. He was speaking in tongues. "You're sick," I said, laying my hand on his forehead. I had to pull it back, biting down on a hiss. He was burning up. Literally. I could barely touch him. When I tried brushing soaking strands of hair out his eyes, he wafted my hand away. "I'm not sick," Wes mumbled. "It's from the crash." I took a slow step back, suddenly very aware of him being contagious. "You're burning up." "I'm fine." He rolled his eyes, but then he coughed, which surprised even him, a startled, choked splutter sending him stumbling off balance. I pretended not to see the slew of red seeping down his chin. He inclined his head, and I caught something in the slither of his iris. Wes had brown eyes. I knew that because I had a silent crush on him all the way through my freshman year, before he started dating Tommy Fields. I used to get lost in his eyes, warm coffee grounds with flecks of orange. But right then, I couldn't ignore the unmistakable green streak bleeding into his iris. "It's just a cold. Dude," he spread out his arms, doing a clumsy twirl. "What do you expect? It's snowing. We're all gonna be a little sniffly." To demonstrate, he swiped his nose, pretending not to see the scarlet smear. "Oh, fuck. Maybe I'm the one turning into strawberry Nesquik." Wes giggled, and his laugh turned into a cough, this time into his hands. He held up the bag of donuts, offering me a two-fingered salute. "I'll be..." Another spluttered cough choked his words, his chest heaving. "Fine." I thought Wes was going to collapse when he swayed left and then right, his eyes flashing, before Wes seemed to catch a hold of himself, finding balance. He pivoted on his heel and waded back down my driveway, struggling through growing snowdrifts. "See you at 12, Summer." I didn't end up going to the meeting after the snow officially locked me inside. But thanks to a mass text sent to our parents' phones, smart, I was informed we were a group of 200 kids, aged 13 to 18 years old, and we were well and truly alone. According to several senior kids, our town was cut off from the rest of the world by the freak weather. I checked the news, and somehow there was nobody talking about it. The huge snowstorm that had hit a small Californian town. There was nothing. Instead, the rest of the world was gearing up for the holidays. It almost felt like we had been yeeted from reality itself. The internet was acting weird. I could see what was happening, but I couldn't post anything. When I flicked through TV channels, they were always the same ones. The mass text also detailed that starting that afternoon, we had to report to the school auditorium for daily crisis meetings. Like every other kid in town, I was numb from losing my family and life itself crumbling around me in a single afternoon, and yet the underdeveloped part of my brain still wanted to take advantage of zero adult authority. Retail therapy it was. I went shopping. I forced myself through towering snowdrifts, lugging a wheelbarrow with me, and stocked up on ramen, soda, all the fresh goods that were still there. And of course candy. The The rest of the store had been stripped of every branded soda and candy you could think of, an army of 13-year-olds leading the charge. I was supposed to attend the crisis meeting, but in my head, what was the point? We were all going to die anyway, so what was the point of trying? So I went home and slept away 12 days. I didn't eat or shower, and the fresh food I dumped on my bedroom floor was starting to smell. Day 1, I slept for most of it, only getting up to down a bottle of water. Day 2, I was barely conscious, only half aware of the lights flickering out. Day 3, loud banging woke me up, and I dragged myself downstairs, opening the door to 2 boys. I vaguely knew them, Henry Mara and Dalton Atlas. The 2 of them were shivering, and when I peeked past them, the snow had let up slightly. Freddie Fauna and his group of freshman freaks took over our house. Henry held up a bag of apples. I think he was offering them as a gift. "Do you mind if we stay here for a while?" His hopeful expression and frostbite lowered my barriers. I nodded and let them in, offering them blankets and letting them have the living room. I went back to bed, crashing onto my pillows, the world tilting. Day 4, Henry and Dalton were arguing over cereal. I ignored them and went back to sleep. Day 5, my mum's phone woke me up at 5 a.m. "Wes Cameron is dead." The words headed my notifications. His body was found inside a pharmacy. Something ice cold slipped through me. Wes had a cold, right? I sat up in bed, suddenly very conscious of the dryness in my throat. I remembered that slither of green creeping into his iris, his clammy forehead. Day 6. I was woken up by another text. This time, 10 15-year-olds were found dead in their homes, all suspected of the flu. Day 7. Henry started coughing downstairs. I jumped out of bed and taped my door shut. I opened my window and took 3 Tylenol. Another text vibrated my phone. 3 more 15-year-olds dead. Day 8. I couldn't get out of bed. My bones felt like lead. I coughed up something onto my pillow, but I didn't look at it. There were 3 texts on my phone. The first one was alerting us that they were going to stop reporting deaths. The second was that they felt sick. And the third was that they wanted their mummy. Day 9. I was burning, rolling around in sweat-soaked sheets with a mouthful of blood. Henry had stopped coughing. I could hear the boys moving around. I hallucinated my brother standing over me with abnormally pointy ears, a grin splitting his mouth wide. I felt his ice-cold fingers tiptoe across my clammy forehead, and when I looked at him, blinking rapidly, I could have sworn his eyes were different. But he was beautiful, grotesquely beautiful, like a fairy. Wes climbed through my window, followed by the girl from the crash. Holly. Day 10. I think I died, my body no longer mine. Day 11. I was still dead, on my bedroom floor, choking up wet, slithering red chunks. I couldn't speak or breathe or eat. My body was scorching, my screams strangling through my lips after bypassing my cooked vocal cords. Day 12. I could move again, not well, but well enough to stand. My body felt strange, too light and yet also heavy, like I was both floating and dragging myself. Calling out for the boys, I headed downstairs, covering my mouth with a soiled pair of pajama pants and stepping straight into sticky red pooling across Mom's prized rug. Henry lay on his back, choking on bubbling scarlet dribbling down his chin. Dalton was vomiting in the sink, his trembling body convulsing, lumps of fleshy red splattered on the floor. Henry's face looked sharper, paler, his eyes sunken, ears pointier. I found myself choking down hysterical giggles that were choking me. Before the thought could graze my mind, my brain was suddenly on fire. I dropped to my knees, coughing, red filling my mouth. My limbs contorted, my head swimming, the sickly stench of peppermint seeping into my nose. Bells rang loud and invasive in my ears. A voice echoed through my skull. "Don't worry, children. The transformation is painful, but only if your body rejects it. Right now, your human tissue is converting to elf tissue. I know it hurts, but I lost quite a lot of my workforce this year, so I have no choice. The show must go on," he boomed. "Human children aren't quite ideal, but they should do the job. I need at least 500 of you to compete with this year's demand." He laughed, and Henry collapsed, his head smacking on the edge of the sink. "I'm sure your parents will become fine meat scraps for my reindeer." I screamed, my body contorting, his words forcing me onto my side. I choked up what I was guessing was my internal organs. All I could think about was my brother. Did this thing work on the dead too? Wes, was he a failure or was dying just the start? When my body lurched onto its side and I choked up something wet and slimy, the floorboards creaked behind me. Henry and Dalton stood. They didn't speak. They just walked out of the door, straight into a blizzard, stardust dripping from them. I waited for my body to twist just like theirs. But I kept bleeding all over myself, sticking my hair to my neck. My eyes flickered, Santa's laugh bouncing in my skull. I waited to die, or at least become an elf. But I didn't. I still felt light and wrong, and when I looked in the mirror, my face was twisted out of shape, my ears too pointy, too sharp. I resembled Faye almost. When I was well enough, I left my house, finding a wasteland of snow and bodies, kids who rejected the transformation. Santa had taken the others and left me. When the snow did start to melt, I had people in masks banging on my door. I let them throw me in an unmarked van and take me out of town. I spent the next several months being experimented on. The man who tested me said the experts has known about Santa's existence for a while, but they hadn't seen what they call a conversion on this scale. Dr. Mycroft, the man who prodded and poked me every day, told me the conversion is the process of human cells and tissue being forcibly transformed. The only way to stop it is to reject the idea of Santa Claus. So, that's what I want all of you to do, right now. Before this thing spreads globally, please. Stop believing in my friends, who forcibly became elves against their will. Wes, Holly, Dom, Henry and Dalton, all the kids he took away. Stop believing in this psychopath who murdered my parents. Stop believing in him. Story 3. So a little context to this, I'm a young guy in a town that no one in the last century would be able to pick out on a map, and I met someone who I don't think was human. It all started out so very plain. I woke up on a crappy bed that should have been thrown out last year with springs that are killing my back. Went to work at 8 at the Home Depot on the only road that ever gets any traffic, but it's still just a 10-minute drive from my house. Work just passed by. A few customers would come in to get big loads for construction sites, but they mostly just need us for the forklift. They already know where. Pretty much everything is, and almost all the rest of the customers were looking for returns and refunds, or which aisle the bathroom seats were on. I clocked out at 4, nothing exciting happened, no weird customer, nothing. I went home and tried to make something resembling a stir-fry, but I realized a bit too late I was missing half the ingredients that made it any good, so I decided to go to the store to see if anything was on sale to make the food taste like food. Food prices are far too high for someone making barely 15 an hour, basically robbery if you ask me. I must have sat there calculating my budget with my stomach for a good hour before deciding on some cheap frozen veggies and the smallest bottle of soy sauce I'd ever seen. People don't appreciate the relationship they have with food nearly enough. I haven't eaten the same since that day. It happened while I was leaving the store. It was almost like a grunting and grinding sound mixed with weird muffled noises. I know I should have just minded my own business and kept it pushing, but something broke through. I couldn't see anything and couldn't hear it well, but I did recognize one thing. A cry being muffled by a hand is something that even if you've never heard it before, your brain just knows what it is. It makes you want to see what it is. So I put my stuff down in my car, and I go over to check what the noise was about. Dumb, I know, but what can I say? Habits are hard to break, and I don't know what else to do with them. I don't see it when rounding the corner. It's a weird array of buildings, and the lights seem to be only on in the parking lot. It wasn't pitch black out, but not much better with the lights too far. So I walk into what looked like an area for employees to go in through the back. And that's when I see them. There must have been at least 6 guys on the ground. It was hard to tell with some of them being on top of each other. But that's not what caught my attention. The girls or women maybe. IDK how old they were, but they looked college age maybe. There was 4 of them. I knew because they were just sitting there staring, hands over their mouths, trying to push the cries back in, almost scared to make a sound. Yet none of them seemed to be gearing to run away. Almost like they were in a panic attack, but trying to put it in a box, if that makes sense. But the strangest thing of all was the guy standing next to the guys on the pavement. He looked as if he had just come into the situation too. He didn't feel hostile, you know. Like that feeling you get when someone's been aggressive or threatening just wasn't there. He seemed almost bored. The closer I got, the more things I noticed about the scene. By the time I stopped, I was about 30 feet away. I could start to make out some objects on the ground, Pipes and broken glass, a broken piece of wood. Almost all of it had some trace of struggle tied to it. None of the girls or the guy had any sign of struggle or something that made me think they had anything to do with the fight. The guy standing there looked to be early 20s, light skin, and couldn't have been taller than 5'11". He had almost black hair, or maybe it was dark brown, hard to tell, just an average guy you'd pass on the street. But then I saw his eyes. They were so brown, and what first looked like boredom on closer look almost seemed like, I don't know what the word for it is, like someone looking for the secret image in a picture but can't quite tell if it's even there. I don't know what made me not call out or ask him what happened. After all, this whole situation felt off. Did a big fight happen? Was he involved or just a passerby? Why wouldn't the girls take their eyes off him? And then he looked over to me. He didn't say anything, but I could almost feel the words popping up in my head from his stare. Like as if he was saying something about modern art or the state of affairs of young people, as if the vision couldn't be realized and he couldn't be bothered to try and understand anymore. While he kept taking glances at me, he began to walk around looking at the debris, like he was searching for something in particular. He kept giving me side glances, almost as if picking out a gift for a friend, and he couldn't decide. The girls started crying harder as he moved, almost petrified when he came near them. Finally, he picked up a piece of rebar and inspected it closely, and he gave me a look of something along the lines of a mighty sword, and he swished it around him, like a kid playing with his new favorite stick. Then he threw it near my feet. The sound of metal and concrete will never be the same to me again. Then while I'm looking between him and the rebar, a small grin began to form on his face with a look of, "You don't like my present." My brain, being sensible, told me I should pick it up. After all, if he was the one who messed up 6 guys by himself, a weapon was mandatory. Quick of a thought that was, came something far more sinister. His grin was beginning to widen and morph to a bigger smile. His feet, I noticed, were almost sideways. His legs sounded heavy, and the way he walked seemed almost as if it took great effort to do so. He walked so casually, as if he was about to greet a longtime friend he hadn't seen or heard from in a while. Maybe that's what it would have looked like from a camera. Every one of his steps triggered something in me, something almost instinctual. I still hadn't said anything, and I barely so much as twitched. But I knew what this feeling was. Prey isn't the right word for it. I was a part of the dinner show. Something like a cat would do with a mouse he had no interest in eating, only making it suffer before the end, priding itself on the pain of things weaker than it. It was suffocating when he was in front of me. He looked down at the rebar and then back to me, almost pleading for me to pick it up, like a kid whose dad won't play make-believe anymore. When I didn't move, he lifted his arm and pointed at me, close enough to almost be touching me, but not quite there. His eyes gave me a look of "I'm not touching you." One of the girls was starting to curl up in her knees, but her hand never left her mouth. Then he did something strange. Keeping his finger pointed at me, he slowly began walking in a circle around me. I stared straight forward, but I could feel his eyes on me the whole way around. The first time he came around, his smile was still playful, and he stopped right in front of me again. He held a finger up and looked at me as if I had one of something. Then I realized he was telling me I had one question. So I asked him the only question I could think of. "What are you?" His smile got bigger. Hungry, almost too high of a voice for a man, almost slurred. Then he began walking around me again, but this time felt different. When he stopped behind me, the girls' faces changed, and the cries almost couldn't be covered anymore. Everything in me was telling me to turn around and try to fight for my life before the thing behind me took it without a fight. But I did nothing. As he was coming over my other side, his smile hadn't changed, but the way his eyes looked hasn't left me, almost like they had sunk further into his face, but they contained an anger that hadn't been there before. But just like last time, he held up one finger, only this time I couldn't think of a better question. Then it came to me. "Who are you?" I barely stuttered out. His smile almost seemed to tear at the points of his mouth as he spoke. "Fun." Only this time his voice was almost split, like two people saying it at once. He tilted his head from side to side, almost debating on his next course of action. He settled on walking around me again, only this time he didn't stop behind me. His face looked almost unreal as he rounded my side, like it couldn't decide if he was experiencing euphoria or anger so hot it would burn him alive. This time, though, the finger that had been pointing at me was the one he held up. He kept making a swirly motion with it as if telling me this would be the last question. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to say so I could leave alive. I thought about asking to leave, but what about the rest of the people here? What happens once I leave? I still didn't understand what was happening now. I could only think of one thing to make it stop. One way so the girls and those guys might be able to leave so that someone might survive. I tried to summon all the bravery I didn't have to ask him the next question. "Can you please leave?" I squeaked out. I don't think that's what he wanted to hear. His hand came right in front of my neck and he began snarling at me. He moved forward and began sniffing around me, almost smelling for something. It took him a minute before he seemed satisfied. When he pulled away, the look on his face began to change back to how he was when I first came over, but it had almost an amused look to it, like he had never been asked that question before. Then he leaned in close to my neck and ear. His breath was so cold, if I couldn't see him in front of me, I would think a freezer might have opened right next me. He whispered the last thing he said to me in my ear, but being careful not to touch me. "All right." His voice sounded almost monotone, like his fun had been killed. And then he began walking away into the darker parts of the night. I could hear him humming. It felt like hours before anyone moved, almost scared to do anything to bring that thing back over. Finally, one of the girls crawled over to one of the guys and began sobbing on his chest, and that's all it took for everything to turn into a blur of motion. I checked my phone, and it hadn't even been 30 minutes since I first walked over. As the rest of the guys began waking up, I noticed something strange going on between them. One of the guys almost jumped up and about fell over again, looking for something. "He left," I told him, but it didn't seem to be the response he was looking for. "Where's Alice? Where's Jenny?" This made the girls break down sobbing, and what they said next broke my heart. I should have realized it sooner. There were 6 guys and 4 girls when I arrived. That didn't mean that's all who came. One of the girls spoke up and said something barely understandable through her crying. He ate them," she said, as she screamed the last part before her forehead touched the ground and her back began to heave as she struggled to breathe. I tried to talk to one of them about what happened, but no one seemed to want to say what exactly happened. But then the guy who asked about the girls looked at me, and then he looked at the ground. We were just messing around, just talking about where we wanted to go get something to eat that had enough space for all of us. He looked back up to me, tears in his eyes, almost pleading with me to understand him. Then he continued, "We go to the college at the edge of town. It's only a 20-minute walk to all the restaurants, and we were just taking a shortcut when we..." He stopped halfway, almost scared to say what happened next. Then we saw him standing there looking up at the sky, giggling to himself. He paused for a moment, then continued. I asked him what was so funny about the sky, but he ignored me and kept giggling to himself. "You should have left him alone. All of you guys would have left him alone." The girl next to him half screamed into his ear. I didn't know. He looked back up to me, but this time he was ashamed. He wasn't doing wrong, we just thought he was slow and it would be fun to mess with him a bit. So we walked up to him and began asking him questions. What questions?" I interrupted him. "Just dumb stuff, you know. Like who he was and what was he doing giggling at the night sky behind a store. Everything was fine until..." He paused again. "Until we started touching him." I looked at him in disbelief, questions burning on my mind on what the hell it took for them to think that any of what they did was okay. But I needed different answers. At first it was just us touching his clothes. He never stopped smiling, so we thought it wouldn't hurt for us. "You thought he was harmless, you mean?" I cut him off again, only this time it was of frustration. "Yeah, we thought he was harmless, okay? Is that what you wanted to hear, huh? It's not like we were beating on him, we were just playing around. Until we weren't." His eyes look almost crazed with grief at this point. He was so fast and strong, almost like he wasn't even human. At first he was just throwing us around until Jake picked up a pipe and swung it at him. After that he stopped pulling his punches. And then it goes dark. He finished looking at the girls for an explanation. The brunette girl was the one who began talking despite looking in between her knees, almost too scared to look at the world. "At the night. After he laid all of you out, he kept hitting you guys, so we tried to get him off you." She stopped and then started again. "Alice and Jenny hopped on his back, but it didn't matter. He slammed both of them into the pavement just as quick, but then he looked at us and we saw his face." "What about his face?" I asked. A different girl spoke up this time. It wasn't normal, it almost looked like a mask of a face twisted in anger, but we all could feel the threat in the air. "What threat?" "If we moved or made a sound, we'd die," she said quietly. But Jenny and Alice didn't want him to go back to beating the guys, so they fought back. It was in another couple of minutes before anyone said anything, But then she finally started up again. Jenny was the first one he started on. Her voice wavered. He grabbed her by her hair and thigh and shoved her down his mouth. And then in went Jenny. She finished, and then she looked over to me. And then you walked over, taking another breath. And then we thought there was two of them. All of them broke down at the statement, so not knowing what else to do, we decided to call the cops. We decided to tell them that a man who fit description of the thing that came here tonight had abducted the two girls at gunpoint rather than what actually happened. No one would have believed anything about that night. The cops grilled all of us for weeks and pulled all the camera footage they could find, but the girls and the thing were never found again, just gone, like he had never been there that night. Even now my hands and fingers are shaking as I try to type this out, trying to rationalize what happened as if words could ever capture the feeling and terror of that night, of him. I know no one who read this is gonna believe this, so I'll only ask one thing of you. No matter what they say or what they look like, don't talk to the things that roam the night. You never know if they've eaten yet. Story 4. I need advice. I joined the United States Army in 2002. I will spare the tiny details and give the gist of what I was doing before the events I'm about to disclose. The crew I was with consisted of several different intellectuals of several different subjects. I was brought in to lead the physics branch of 5 people, including me. There was also a chemistry and biology branch totaling 15 different people, plus a guy who was under direct orders from the Secretary of Defense. None of the scientists knew why they had been called, nor how underprepared they, or I suppose we, all were. As you know, we have taken all of your means of communication with the outside world. The task that you 15 people have needs to be one of the best kept secrets ever. Wallace, the man who was giving orders, paced as he spoke. I will be the only way for any of you to communicate with the outside world. Any questions? The idea reminded me of how the atomic bombs were made. Each scientist getting a piece of the puzzle without any idea of what the larger picture could be. One of the biologists, Lawrence, raised his hand. Why, what is the big secret? We will get to that subject in a moment. Please just follow my orders right now. We were ushered into a plane, then, after several hours, a helicopter, and then after that, a building. We made it to the location where we would be staying for the next several months, possibly years, should we have to stay longer. The base was someplace in the middle of nowhere, probably in the Middle East, considering the time it took and the surroundings. The base looked dirty on the outside, appearing abandoned. Inside the base were 2 other people keeping the place warm and clean. The 2 greeted us and showed us around. We had all the basics, bedrooms, bathrooms, workplaces, etc. The place wasn't quickly built. They had planned for this for a long while before we were brought over. Looking at the walls and the technology in the building, they must have been planning this for years. In the center of the base, there was a shallow cave. We couldn't enter this center area immediately. The inside of the cave was highly radioactive. This meant that only 1 team at a time would be permitted to go inside the cave to get the data that they needed if they needed it. My team was chosen to go second. The excitement of discovering something new to help America infected each team member. After the first group of 5, the biologists, returned from the cave, we wasted no time getting the protective gear and rushing inside. There wasn't much to the cave itself, but opposite the entrance was a statue of some strange face, black as coal. The face was larger than everyone, probably 8 feet tall. Whatever the face was made out of was very radioactive, emitting around 200 Röntgen. The artistry and detail of the statue amazed me, but it did not make sense yet. Why were we brought out in the first place? What was going on? After my group of 5 was done with our observations, we traded with the last group, and after the last group returned, we all were gathered in a room where Wallace began to speak. I apologize, there was some paperwork that needed to be signed. He sat down with the rest of us, shifting, visibly uncomfortable. What I say next may come to confuse you, or you won't believe it. He let out a long sigh before continuing. What you saw in that cave is older than any known life on Earth. Are you suggesting that aliens made that statue in that cave? Charlie, one of my physicist colleagues, blurted. That isn't a statue. He paused as what he was suggesting slowly began to sink in. That is the alien himself, someone unfamiliar to me asked. That's definitely possible, but why did we... Another person I didn't know very well began to speak, but was quickly cut off. Let me speak. Wallace's voice was dark, demanding the attention of all of us. "We know jack shit about this thing. Why we only found it now? Found it 2 years ago. Nobody knows anything. That is why you all are here." He paused. "Now, it is your job to figure out its origins, figure out how it functions, and what we should do about it." The room was silent. "Now you are dismissed. I hope you all got all the samples and data you needed for today. You are only allowed to go in there with my supervision, or by getting approval from Kendrick." Kendrick was one of the guys already here once we arrived. We all made quick work, everyone gathering as much information as possible. We spent the next few weeks examining, but other than our initial observations, we had no idea what to do next. We poked and prodded the thing but got no reaction or anything. We couldn't get a pulse or find breathing. Its skin was harder than any Earth material, a mix of carbon and several different metals. During the long weeks of not finding anything new, Lawrence would sit next to me during some of our meals. The biologist and I had become somewhat of friends, despite never meeting before this mission. He always made an attempt to get me to open up about my life, and how I ended up as the lead in our physics branch of 5. Truth is, I'm just good at math and I had no money, so I joined the army. Lawrence never liked that answer. "It's too boring of an answer for a guy with good looks like you." "Sorry, I'm not the main character with a tragic backstory," I'd always respond. Lawrence would then tell me about himself. I didn't care at all, but I'd still ended up entertaining him, trying to be polite. He would talk about his mum back home, and how his dad was in the army before he passed away from some sort of cancer. He made the choice to join the army during his sophomore year of high school, working hard to get into the best army-related programs while attempting to maintain a social life. In such a social life, he would break the hearts of girls and even have his own heart broken, telling me names of girls I had never met. A far more fulfilling high school experience to contrast my high school experience, which lacked any real human connection. Seb, or some other scientist, would then sit down, Sebastian was a physicist under me, and be forced to tell us both about himself. Lawrence brought a home-like feeling to a place that otherwise would put us all on edge. But we all still had work to do. A few of the guys were about to give up after 1 month, but on a random Saturday night, the thing opened his eyes. I was the first in the room this time. I was the first to make contact. I was the first to see his 2 amber irises almost... No, they were glowing. The inferno of hell seemed to reach for me from those eyes. This giant was alive. The 4 other scientists who followed me paused. Shock, horror, and fear washed over them. Slowly, suddenly, loudly, this alien turned the ends of his mouth into a smile. Dust, soot, and ash broke free from its face. A low sound was emitted from the thing as we watched. Along with that sound, one of the Geiger counters began to show a massive increase in radiation. We were immediately called to leave the cave. We had to retreat outside of the initial building as the radiation became out of control. A couple 100 feet outside the building entrance, we were still getting signs of dangerous radiation. We had to set up an emergency camp. That night we surveyed the entire area. The radiation from the thing now was cast out across just under a mile radius, with the cave as the center. The small ensemble of scientists all gathered under one tent to discuss what the hell happened that morning. But none of us could come up with an explanation. The conclusion, or rather the solution, was that we needed better equipment, better and more accurate instruments, and, if possible, a way to dig this thing up. The next day we got most of what we asked for, and more. We now had 15 experimental suits that were supposed to be better equipped to help us reach this thing buried in the sand, alongside 15 more people who were all engineers. They brought instruments we had never seen before and showed us how to use them. There was one girl among those new 15 people. She gave me her latest invention, a stronger, better drill. It's simple but heavy. You carry that large battery and the drill can drive a hole in anything. Thank you. This should help gather the samples we need. If it's all right, can I ask what kind of samples are you getting with such a drill? I mean, this isn't the most advanced technology. You could get the same effect with a larger drill or even an explosive. She had an accusing look and tone that would have made any untrained person crack under the pressure. But if she didn't already know, she didn't need to know. There is a cave. Its structure is very unstable, but we need to get something out from the center. What is in the center? I can't disclose that right now. You know how the government is with its secrets. I add straps to the large battery, allowing it to be carried like a backpack. The 2 of us talk a bit more, mostly about conspiracy theories. After some time had passed, it was time for the original 15 scientists to return to the building and gather more data from the demonic statute. The closer we got, the more radioactive the area became. The inside of the building went from 0 Roentgens to 200 and rising. By the time we opened the door to the center of the building, the cave room was up to 750 Roentgens. The giant's eyes were still open, looking at us. A guy named Roland tried to speak to the thing. The thing was amused, letting out a similar noise to when we were last here. He was laughing, but none of us knew it yet. Before we could start using our new tools, the ground came out from under us, darkness swallowing us whole. I fell for what felt like forever before I hit the bottom. When I felt the ground under me, I took note of my surroundings. There were 3 of us in the vicinity. There was Lawrence, a guy I mentioned earlier. There was also a guy who I didn't associate much with, who people just called Grandpa, due to being over the age of 29 and being in the army. And there was me. Both me and Lawrence hurried over to help Grandpa, as he was visibly hurt from the fall. I can't tell you why I and Lawrence didn't get hurt, but it most likely was the suit and the amount of protection the suit had. Fucking hell, what the fuck happened? Grandpa immediately cursed, swearing up a storm. Lawrence would check more data about the cave we were in as I attempted to radio anybody, but the signal was completely drowned out. Holy shit! Lawrence was in shock. I looked over. He was looking at the radiation levels. What is it? 10,000. 10,000 what? Take a fucking guess. We are like in the center of the fucking sun. He was right, and it didn't make any sense. None of this did. The situation was impossible. 13 remain. A loud, booming voice filled the entire cave. The 3 of us all looked at each other. The voice was unfamiliar. It didn't belong to any of the men who came with us. What does he want? Lawrence asked nervously. Let's get to the center and find out, damn it, shouted Grandpa. Quit shouting, Lawrence snapped back. Wait, where are we? I asked. The 3 of us pause, look up, left, right, and all around. We fell several hundred feet, but we could now touch the ceiling of this cave. The feeling of claustrophobia creeps up my spine as my eyes look into the shadows ahead. The long stone hallway we found ourselves in, seemingly endless. Darkness ahead of us. Darkness behind us. No explanation of how we got here or where to go. The silence between the 3 of us was overwhelming, only to be broken by Lawrence taking a step forward, each step clicking and clacking on the solid, uneven ground. Grandpa followed him, and I helped Grandpa keep up. None of us spoke for about an hour, unsure if this was a dream, unsure about anything and everything. As Grandpa kept going, his breathing became more labored, and about the time we hit that 1 hour mark, Grandpa fell to the ground. A small beeping sound started to emit from his suit. Both me and Lawrence check on him. Hey Grandpa, are you okay? I asked, turning him over. He's dead, Lawrence says grimly. You're joking, right? He was walking just moments ago. How can someone just die? Look. Sure enough, the suit was damaged. A small cut, the smallest cut on the inner thigh, exposed the man to lethal radiation. It must have torn apart after walking for so long, or maybe after the fall wore down that area. 12. The same booming voice from earlier spoke and shook the ground, dust being disturbed, creating a light fog in the hall. A moment later, 11, 10. We had to get going again, deciding that if we made it out, we would come back to retrieve the body of Grandpa. The 2 of us continued forward in silence, moving along much faster now. 20 minutes after the 11th person went down, the 10th person also perished, leaving 9 of us. 40-ish minutes after that, Lawrence and I entered a large chasm in the earth. The rocky room was large, several hundred feet ahead of us. In the center of the supposed central area was a large figure. It was the thing that brought us here, standing tall over us with his amber eyes. The walls of this place were filled with entrances and other ways to go and leave, much like the long stretch of cave we came from. He was still smiling like before. The alien remained silent as Lawrence grabbed my shoulder to get me to look at him. Hey, did you hear anything of what I just said? What? I said you should use that drill and dig into the thing, see if it bleeds. Lawrence spoke with revenge on his mind. I never heard him speak with such conviction. It wasn't until this moment did I realize how dire my situation was, how hopeless and how gruesome things were turning out. Someone died in front of me. He had a mum and dad, a wife who had his kid waiting for him to come home. But that man who was raised by a loving mum and dad, the husband who loved his wife, a father who has a kid who will never meet him, he doesn't come home. What would I say to them? Talking to Grandpa's family? What could I legally say? That family is never going to figure out how he truly died. I can't, I meekly responded. The thought of me dying here unceremoniously like Grandpa overwhelmed me. My eyes began to fog up as tears rolled down my face. Lawrence, unhappy with the emotion I was expressing, took the drill and tore its battery off of my back. I sat on the floor, left with nothing but my emotions. I couldn't see very well, nor could I clean my face of the tears, but I could hear Lawrence walk towards the large statue. Each step made a heavy sound. It wasn't long before he took the drill to the thing. The sound of metal on metal filled the entire cave and the several small offshoots that led to the room we happened upon. After 7 minutes of non-stop drilling, it suddenly turns quiet. Where there were once sparks of the drill on the indestructible statue was now darkness. My tears would eventually subside and dry on their own. I pat my suit down looking for a flashlight. The only thing visible at the current moment was the low glow of orange and violence emitted from the eyes of the thing. 8. The noise shook the room hard, knocking me off my feet. "Lawrence, are you there?" I shout, praying that I am not left alone with this monster. I crawled closer to the statue, where I saw Lawrence walking. I find his suit, his flashlight, and the drill, but it's almost as if he was... I turned on the flashlight. The dusty fog was replaced by a red mist. Lawrence's suit was empty. I open the helmet and there is a small beep letting me know it has been unlatched. Lawrence had just vanished, killed by the giant. Another man was killed unceremoniously. His mum will never know the truth of his death, how sudden it was. I didn't have long to think before I could hear voices coming from 2 different branches of the cave system. "Hello, anyone there?" one of the voices shouted. "Over here," said the other voices from the other end. I stood up. There were the other 7 members, split 2 on my left and 5 on my right. I shone the flashlight to where the drill was trying to dig. It appears that Lawrence did manage to break through the skin, and the thing did bleed. A thick black substance slowly crawled out of the hole, drilled out, almost like honey or tar. The thing made that dreadful noise. He laughed at us once again as the 2 other groups emerged from their respective branches. All 8 of us were now gathered at the belly of the earth, where this ancient alien had been trapped. I turned off my flashlight and hid beside the legs of the statue. I'm not sure what compelled me to do so, but it may have been a good decision. "Who is all here?" somebody asked. The other 7 men still standing were Seb, Nathan, Charles, Rick Dick Harris, Barry, Max, and Sheridan. Of course, I was the 8th. "Where is the 8th person?" asked Nathan. "I suppose it doesn't really matter," Seb responded. "We all are going to die anyway." "What do you think this thing wants us to do?" Max asked. The 7 of them all approach each other at one of the far ends of the room. Just moments after they all joined together, a loud noise was heard, like a gun. "7!" the voice called out. "What the fuck, Dick?" someone shouted. I didn't get a good view on what happened, but Dick used one of our tools to put a hole in the head of Sheridan. The other men quickly pinned down Dick. "We have to kill each other. Only one of us can get out alive." Dick began laughing. I look over at the drill that Lawrence left behind. The giant laughed again, almost confirming Dick's accusation. Silence. 6 remain. I couldn't figure out who killed Dick, but someone tore his suit open, killing him using radiation. I grabbed the drill. I would reason with myself that this was only for self-defense, that there had to be another way out. But before I could think, the 5 men behind me started to brawl. They began to fight like dogs, grabbing, punching, and throwing each other around. They began to grab at whatever tools they came in with that could be dangerous. Of course, it wasn't long before another gun-like shot rang through the chasm. The voice would boom, and the animals across from me continued to fight. I am ashamed that I didn't step in and stop them. The scene of my men fighting before me and killing each other haunts my dreams nightly. But I couldn't figure out how to get out of here. I should have been a better man. After a long time, only 1 man was standing. 2 remain. I clutched the drill in my hand. "Where are you?" It was Seb who screamed out. He was adopted and raised in a family that loved him. He had a wife too. They met at some sort of gathering for active duty personnel. I emerged from my spot. He shone his light down on me. His shadow loomed as tall as the giant. "Don't make this difficult. I have a wife. You don't have anyone," Seb called out to me. He was right. I didn't have any family waiting for me. Not like how Seb has a family waiting for him. But I couldn't let myself just die. "I am sorry, Seb. I always hated that nickname." Seb dropped his flashlight and charged me with his tool. I lifted my drill, pointed it at him, and prepared it. He slowed himself to a walk just a few steps away. He had brought the gun-like tool. The tool built up pressure and shot out a hollow steel-like tube, and when the tool retracted, it would have a sample of rock in the shape of a cylinder. The two of us stood there thinking of what to do next. I broke the silence by turning the drill on and letting it spin. I make a quick movement to jab at him with the spinning drill, and Seb takes a step back before driving the gun-like tool into the base of the drill and firing. The drill was busted now. I unplug it from the battery still on my back. Seb takes another step towards me, trying to jab at me with the gun. I grab the heavy battery from my back, and using the straps attached to it, I swing it at Seb, hitting the side of his head. Seb knocked down and dazed. I proceeded to take the battery and bash it into the helmet of Seb's suit. And like that, I was the last one standing. I had satisfied the god, but at what cost? The blood of good men. The god spoke. "You have one wish." One wish. The silence dragged on. I had been playing a death game to win a prize that I couldn't fathom. Could I wish for anything? "I wish to go back in time before we come here and bring all of my crew back," I shout. "Their souls are already gone." The god laughed at me. He bent down, the soot and ash-like substance falling on me. On my level now, I could see into his eyes again. "What is your wish?" the tall god asked me one last time. Those hellish eyes will always be ingrained into my memory. But then I recalled my own home, where Mom and Dad waited for me. "I wish to never see you again." The god smiled as he opened his mouth and laid down, like one of those large faces at a carnival or circus that you walk in. I understood what he wanted me to do. Darkness swallowed me. When I woke up, there was warm sand under me and the hot sun beating down on me. The cave was gone. So was the camp that I stayed in just last night. I would eventually make it home, another story for another day, and I was honorably discharged. The situation has now been mostly swept under the rug. If you were to ask about the life of any of the people whose names I have written here, it would be said that they died in the war down in the Middle East. When asked about the god, they found they would laugh. That brings me to the modern day. They found the cave again. It moved someplace else somehow, and Wallace wants me back. I can't bear the thought of facing those amber eyes again. As long as there is a cave with a god in it, that god in it, people will die. Good people. As long as there is that damn cave, good people will turn on each other. Moreover, what if they find a way to weaponize the thing? What do I do? Story 5. I've always been obsessed with podcasts. Some people binge-watch shows or scroll endlessly through social media. I had Creepcast. It wasn't just background noise. It was my thing. I started listening obsessively back in 2024 when I was 19 and had just landed my first real job. Every morning, while I got ready for work, it would play. I still remember the episode I was listening to the first time it happened. It was Pen Pal, a story about memory, loss, and something darker. At the time, I was an emotionally frayed kid, perpetually exhausted by the world's sharp edges. I think that's why I loved Creepcast so much. It was a safe way to explore the things that scared other people without ever feeling too overwhelmed myself. Reality had never felt quite solid to me anyway. The horrors in those stories weren't real and weren't coming to get me. That morning, like any other, I had stepped out of the shower, my phone paired to the small black Bluetooth speaker on the counter. The podcast's host had just started reading a particularly unsettling scene. I wrapped myself in a towel, the cold air biting at my skin as I reached to hit play again. Then I heard it. It wasn't the narrator's voice or the ambient noises layered into the episode for effect. This sound came from somewhere else. A wet, crackling pulse. It was faint at first, like the sound of damp wood twisting in a fire, but wetter, more organic. The noise slithered into my ears, bypassing the rational part of my brain entirely, and rooted itself somewhere deep. My skin prickled as if I was suddenly aware of every hair on my body. It wasn't coming from the speaker. It wasn't coming from my phone. It wasn't in the room. But it also wasn't inside me. The sound didn't belong, and yet it was there, pressing against the edges of my perception like a parasite trying to burrow in. My chest tightened with a nervous, instinctive revulsion, the kind that lives in your DNA, a feeling as ancient as fear itself. I froze, towel clinging to my damp skin, heart pounding against my ribs. For a moment, the world around me felt warped, stretched, off-kilter. The tiny bathroom, the fogged mirror, the faint scent of my shampoo, all of it felt fragile, like a thin layer of glass over something unfathomable. And the sound grew louder. Not in volume exactly, but in presence. It was everywhere and nowhere at once, wet, crackling, pulsing, the kind of sound you shouldn't hear unless you were submerged in something alive. My hands trembled as I reached for the speaker, fumbling to turn it off. The podcast stopped abruptly, cutting to silence. But the noise didn't stop. It lingered for a moment, like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. I stood there for what felt like hours, dripping onto the tiled floor, waiting for something, anything to happen. But nothing did. At least not that day. Over the next few days, the sound returned. Sometimes it was just a faint pulse at the edge of my hearing, barely noticeable over the podcast's narration. Other times, it would surge like a wave, so loud and visceral that I would lunge for my speaker in panic, convinced it was malfunctioning. But even when the sound cut out, it still lingered somewhere, crawling beneath my awareness like a splinter I couldn't reach. It started happening outside of the bathroom, at work, in my car, at night, just as I was drifting off to sleep. The wet crackling wasn't tied to the podcast anymore, it was tied to me. I stopped listening to Creepcast, hoping that would help, but it didn't. One night, while lying awake in bed, the sound returned, sharper and clearer than ever before. The wetness of it made my stomach churn, and the rhythmic pulse felt synchronized with the frantic pounding of my heart. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the noise didn't stop. I scrambled out of bed and into the bathroom, flicking on the harsh fluorescent lights. My reflection stared back at me, pale and sweat-slicked. My hands trembled as I gripped the sink, the cold porcelain grounding me just enough to catch my breath. Then I saw it, a faint red streak across my forearm. My breath hitched as I leaned closer to the mirror. The skin was raw, angry, as if scratched or scraped, peeled. The sight made my head swim, the edges of my vision darkening. The crackling sound intensified, louder now, louder than it had ever been. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, and bit down hard on my lip. The pain brought a fleeting clarity, and I swore to myself that I'd get a grip. This wasn't real, it couldn't be. But the scratches grew worse. Day after day, I'd wake up with new ones, angry red lines streaking across my arms, my legs, even my stomach. Some looked like deep gouges, as if something had clawed at me in my sleep. Others were smaller but more numerous, overlapping in chaotic patterns like a frenzy of violence. My co-workers started noticing. "Are you okay?" they'd ask, eyes darting to the long sleeves I now wore every day, even in the summer heat. "You look tired." "Bah." I was tired. The sound wouldn't let me sleep. It was always there now, in the background, eating away at my thoughts. Wet, pulsing, endless. Eventually, I stopped going to work altogether. I couldn't face anyone, couldn't explain the scratches or the sound. I locked myself in my room, curtains drawn tight, and tried to drown the sound out with music, TV, anything. But it was always louder. One night, I caught myself in the bathroom mirror again, staring blankly at my reflection. My skin was a mess of red and raw patches, my eyes sunken and wild. My hands trembled at my sides, caked with dried blood I didn't remember shedding. They found me curled up on the bathroom floor. I remember flashes, the cool sting of a stretcher against my skin, the red-black smear of blood on my fingertips, the blur of faces looming over me. I remember the sound too, wet and pulsing, louder than ever, drowning out the panicked voices around me. When I woke up, I wasn't in my apartment anymore. The room was blindingly white, sterile. The faint scent of antiseptic burned my nose. My arms were wrapped tightly in gauze, and my wrists were bound to the sides of the bed with thick straps. I tried to move, but even that small effort left me dizzy and nauseous. "Good, you're awake," a voice said gently. I turned my head slowly, the motion making my neck ache. A woman in a white coat stood at the foot of my bed, clipboard in hand. Her expression was calm, but there was a flicker of something else behind her eyes. Caution, maybe. "Do you know where you are?" she asked. My voice came out as a dry rasp. "No." "You're in the psychiatric ward at St. Vincent's. My name is Dr. Bennett. Do you remember what happened before you got here?" I blinked at her, the question heavy in my head. My memories felt fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle forced together in all the wrong ways. I remembered the sound, the scratches, the blood. I remembered the mirror, my reflection, my hands. No, I lied. She nodded, glancing down at her clipboard. Your neighbors called the police after hearing you screaming. They found you in your bathroom, severely injured. Do you know how you got those wounds? I didn't answer. My mouth felt like it was full of sand. Dr. Bennett sighed softly and moved closer, her tone growing gentler. This isn't unusual in cases like yours. When someone is under immense stress, sometimes the mind fractures. It tries to cope in ways that can be harmful. That's what we're going to work on, okay? I stared at her, my heart pounding harder with every word. Something about her tone, her choice of words, fractures, stress, coping, made me feel like I was a child being scolded for drawing on the walls. But it was more than that. It was the wet sound, the squelch, the pulse. It was louder now, thrumming through my skull like a second heartbeat. My body stiffened against the straps. Do you hear it? I whispered. Dr. Bennett tilted her head. Hear what? The sound, I hissed, my voice rising. It's in my head. It's everywhere. I can't... Her expression didn't change. If anything, it softened, like she was trying not to spook me. It's not real, she said calmly. I know it feels real, but it's a hallucination, something your brain is creating in response to trauma. It's common for people with schizophrenia. I'm not crazy, I snapped, thrashing against the restraints. The sound grew deafening, roaring in my ears like an ocean tide, wet and endless. It's real. It's not just in my head. It's me. It's me. Can't you hear it? Calm down, she said firmly, stepping back to signal a nurse. We're going to give you something to help you relax. But her words faded into the background as the memories rushed in all at once. The scratches, the blood, the jagged red lines carved into my arms, my legs, my stomach, my nails broken and filthy, scraping endlessly at my skin while the sound whispered encouragement in my ears. My breathing hitched, tears spilling down my face. My eyes darted to Dr. Bennett, who was watching me closely, a needle in her hand now. It's me, I whispered again, my voice breaking. They found me curled up on the bathroom floor. I remember flashes, the cool sting of a stretcher against my skin, the red-black smear of blood on my fingertips, the blur of faces looming over me. I remember the sound too, wet and pulsing, louder than ever, drowning out the panicked voices around me. When I woke up, I wasn't in my apartment anymore. The room was blindingly white, sterile. The faint scent of antiseptic burned my nose. My arms were wrapped tightly in gauze, and my wrists were bound to the sides of the bed with thick straps. I tried to move, but even that small effort left me dizzy and nauseous. Good, you're awake, a voice said gently. I turned my head slowly, the motion making my neck ache. A woman in a white coat stood at the foot of my bed, clipboard in hand. Her expression was calm, but there was a flicker of something else behind her eyes. Caution, maybe. Do you know where you are? She asked. My voice came out as a dry rasp. No. You're in the psychiatric ward at St. Vincent's. My name is Dr. Bennett. Do you remember what happened before you got here? I blinked at her, the question heavy in my head. My memories felt fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle forced together in all the wrong ways. I remembered the sound, the scratches, the blood. I remembered the mirror, my reflection, my hands. No, I lied. She nodded, glancing down at her clipboard. Your neighbors called the police after hearing you screaming. They found you in your bathroom, severely injured. Do you know how you got those wounds? I didn't answer. My mouth felt like it was full of sand. Dr. Bennett sighed softly and moved closer, her tone growing gentler. This isn't unusual in cases like yours. When someone is under immense stress, sometimes the mind fractures. It tries to cope in ways that can be harmful. That's what we're going to work on, okay? I stared at her, my heart pounding harder with every word. Something about her tone, her choice of words, fractures, stress, coping, made me feel like I was a child being scolded for drawing on the walls. But it was more than that. It was the wet sound, the squelch, the pulse. It was louder now, thrumming through my skull like a second heartbeat. My body stiffened against the straps. Do you hear it? I whispered. Dr. Bennett tilted her head. Hear what? The sound, I hissed, my voice rising. It's in my head. It's everywhere. I can't... Her expression didn't change. If anything, it softened, like she was trying not to spook me. It's not real, she said calmly. I know it feels real, but it's a hallucination, something your brain is creating in response to trauma. It's common for people with schizophrenia. I'm not crazy, I snapped, thrashing against the restraints. The sound grew deafening, roaring in my ears like an ocean tide, wet and endless. It's real. It's not just in my head. It's me. It's me. Can't you hear it? Calm down, she said firmly, stepping back to signal a nurse. We're going to give you something to help you relax. But her words faded into the background as the memories rushed in all at once. The scratches, the blood, the jagged red lines carved into my arms, my legs, my stomach, my nails broken and filthy, scraping endlessly at my skin while the sound whispered encouragement in my ears. My breathing hitched, tears spilling down my face. My eyes darted to Dr. Bennett, who was watching me closely, a needle in her hand now. It's me, I whispered again, my voice breaking. Weeks passed. The hospital room, sterile and quiet, became my refuge. They said I was sick. Schizophrenic, they called it. My wounds, my actions, the sound, it was all explained away as a product of my fractured mind. The medication helped. Slowly, the wet, squelching noise faded. The overwhelming compulsion to tear at my skin ebbed until it was a faint, almost forgotten itch. Dr. Bennett assured me this was progress, and after weeks of therapy, she sat me down with a calm but firm tone. You're doing well, she said. Your hallucinations have stopped, and you've shown no signs of self-harm. How do you feel about going home? Home. The word felt strange after everything, but the thought of leaving the sterile walls of the hospital, of resuming a normal life, was too tempting to resist. I nodded. Good. But remember, triggers are dangerous, she continued. Avoid stress, keep taking your medication, and if anything feels overwhelming, anything at all, you call us. Understand? I agreed. A week later, I was discharged. At home, everything felt quieter. My apartment seemed smaller, darker, but I chalked it up to the time I'd spent away. I avoided the bathroom mirror and kept my Bluetooth speaker shoved in the back of a drawer. The wounds on my arms had faded to scars, long, jagged reminders of what I was told wasn't real. I fell into a routine: work, therapy, sleep. For the first time in months, life felt stable. Then Creepcast showed up in my podcast feed. It was an early morning when I saw it. New episode, The Hollow Sound. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't listened to a single episode since the hospital. My finger hovered over the screen. Bennett had warned me about triggers, but something about the title tugged at me, whispering that it would be okay. I was better now, stronger. I tapped play. The familiar voices filled my headphones, warm and hearty, like a memory I didn't know I missed. I leaned back and let the story unfold, the gentle hum of narration lulling me into a strange kind of peace, until I heard it again. The wet, pulsing sound returned faintly at first, almost imperceptible beneath the narration. I froze, my stomach twisting. My breath came quicker, but I told myself it wasn't real. I turned up the volume, drowning it out. But it didn't stop. It got louder, rising in rhythm, a sickening pulse that made the edges of my vision blur. I yanked out the earbuds and threw my phone across the couch. The sound didn't go away. It was coming from the walls. My hands began to shake. My mind spun. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. I repeated it like a mantra, but the words felt weak, powerless against the rising panic that squeezed my chest. My eyes darted around the room, but nothing was there. It's all in my head, I tried to convince myself. I grabbed my phone and hit the contact for Dr. Bennett. The line rang, echoing too loud in my ears. "Hello, this is Dr. Bennett," came her familiar voice, calm and professional, but somehow distant. "Dr. Bennett, it's me. Something's happening. The noise, it's back. The wet sound." I heard her pause, the calmness in her voice still there, but tinged with something else. Was it concern? "Take a deep breath and tell me what you're experiencing." I can hear it. It's like it's coming from the walls, and I feel it inside me, like it's crawling under my skin again. I can't. The phone slipped from my shaking hand, but I didn't notice. I didn't need to hear her words anymore. My eyes locked on the doorframe of my apartment, where the shadow had moved. The darkness was spreading, thickening, like ink bleeding across paper. Something shifted in the corner of the room. I was no longer alone. "Dr. Bennett, it's real. It's in the..." I never finished the sentence. A figure stepped from the shadows, its movement slow and deliberate. My breath stopped. The creature didn't make a sound, but I felt its presence, a weight in the air, suffocating. It was huge, a hulking mass of malformed flesh. Its body was an unnatural patchwork of skin, muscles, and sinew, stitched together in jagged, grotesque seams. The flesh seemed to pulse as if it were alive on its own, writhing and twitching like a colony of parasites beneath the surface. The claws were the worst part. Long, jagged, and twisted, they scraped the walls with an awful rasping noise that made my stomach churn. But it was the way it moved that froze me. It didn't run. It didn't need to. It slithered, almost like it was gliding on its own sickening weight, its presence suffocating. It lurked in the corners of my vision, always just on the edge, just barely out of focus. And it watched. It's not real, I told myself, but the words felt hollow in the pit of my stomach. I scrambled for my phone, but it slid away from my reach, and the wet sound, the squelch, filled the apartment, louder now, like it was coming from all sides. It was inside the walls, inside the floors, inside me. The creature knew it. I fell back against the wall, my breath shallow, chest tightening as it crawled closer. Its claws scraped across the floor, a sound that seemed to slice through my very bones. It didn't speak, but I could feel it in my bones, its hunger, its need. It wanted me. And the worst part was, I knew that it had always been here, just waiting for the right moment, the right crack in my mind to slip through. And now I couldn't escape.